They train us to handle bears, mountain lions, and lost hikers. Nobody trained us for what lives deeper in these woods, and nobody warned us. It already knows your name. The Columbia River Gorge has always been a place of secrets. Like many who work these trails, I've learned to read its moods. The way the wind changes direction before a storm, how the eagles circle when something's died in the forest, and most importantly, how the fog moves. That last bit's crucial because the fog in the gorge doesn't behave like normal fog. It has purpose, intention even. Some of the older rangers say it's alive, though they'll never admit that in their official reports. My name's Peter Riker, and I've been a ranger here for 7 years. Before that, I worked a desk job in Portland that slowly drained my soul until I couldn't take it anymore. The wilderness called to me, promising solitude and peace. What it delivered was something else entirely. September 2003 started normally enough. The summer tourists had thinned out, leaving behind their usual scattered debris, forgotten water bottles, granola bar wrappers, and the occasional lost hiking pole. The autumn chill was just beginning to creep in, painting the maples with hints of red and gold. That's when the disappearances began. The first two were a couple from Seattle, experienced hikers who'd tackled some of the toughest trails in the Pacific Northwest. They'd checked in at the ranger station on a Tuesday morning, planning a 3-day trek along the ridge. Their car stayed in the parking lot for a week before anyone reported them missing. When we finally went looking, we found their campsite intact, tent still pitched, sleeping bags laid out, even food in the bear box, but no sign of struggle, no blood, no tracks leading away. It was as if they'd simply vanished into thin air. 3 days later, a group of 3 local hikers disappeared from a different trail. These weren't tourists, they were Portland natives who knew the gorge like their own backyard. One was a geology professor who'd been studying the basalt formations for 20 years. The others were former students of his who'd joined him on countless expeditions. Their disappearance made even less sense than the first. The local papers ran stories about mountain lions, though we hadn't had a confirmed sighting in years. Some suggested a serial killer, but that didn't explain the lack of evidence. No bodies, no blood, not even a scuffed boot print in the mud. Nothing. Then there were the whispers from the Native American communities along the river. The elders spoke of ancient things that lived in the shadows between the cliffs, creatures that had been here long before the first European settlers arrived. They warned of a hunger that went beyond mere predatory instinct, a hunger that could only be satisfied by human flesh. I'd always dismissed such stories as folklore designed to keep children from wandering too far into the wilderness. But standing in my kitchen that September morning, watching the fog roll in through my window, something felt different. The mist moved with an unusual deliberateness, like fingers reaching out to test the air. It seemed thicker than usual, almost opaque, and carried a heaviness that made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. I packed my gear methodically, trying to shake off the growing sense of unease. Extra batteries for the flashlight, first aid kit, radio, maps I knew I wouldn't need but carried anyway, my thermos of coffee, black and strong enough to wake the dead. Everything went into my pack with practiced efficiency. The drive to Cascade Locks was quiet, too quiet. No other cars on the road, no early morning joggers, not even the usual deer crossing the highway. The fog had settled into the valleys between the cliffs, creating ghostly canyons of white. As I pulled into the ranger station parking lot, I noticed something odd about the way it moved. Instead of dissipating in the morning sun as it usually did, it seemed to be growing denser. My colleague Sarah was already at her desk when I walked in. She looked up from her computer, dark circles under her eyes, suggesting another sleepless night. 2 more missing persons reports came in last night, she said without preamble. Both experienced hikers, both on different trails. I felt my stomach tighten. Any patterns? She shook her head. Nothing obvious. Different times of day, different trails, different types of hikers. The only common factor is the fog. Every disappearance happened when visibility was low. I looked out the window at the thick white soup enveloping the trees. I'm heading out to check the upper trails, I told her, adjusting my pack. Sarah's face tightened with concern. Be careful out there, Peter. Something's not right with these disappearances. I nodded, trying to project more confidence than I felt. I'll radio in every hour, standard procedure. As I stepped outside, the fog seemed to part before me, then close in behind like a curtain. I couldn't shake the feeling that it was watching me, evaluating me. That's when I should have turned back. But duty called, and I had a job to do. Besides, what could possibly be worse than a mountain lion? I was about to find out exactly how wrong that assumption was. The trail to Cascade Locks starts innocently enough, winding through stands of Douglas fir and western red cedar that have stood sentinel for centuries. That morning, the fog had transformed the familiar path into something alien. The moisture in the air dampened all sound, creating a bubble of silence, broken only by my footsteps, and the occasional drip of condensation from the canopy above. As I walked, I mentally reviewed what we knew about the disappearances. 7 people gone without a trace in less than 2 weeks. No pattern to the locations, except that they all happened within the gorge system. No evidence of foul play, no signs of animal attacks. Just empty campsites and worried families waiting for answers we couldn't give them. The first mile of trail passed without incident. I made my scheduled radio check-in with Sarah, my voice sounding strangely muffled in the thick air. Trail marker 1 clear, moving on to section 2. Her response came back with more static than usual, but clear enough to understand. Copy that, Peter. Watch yourself up there. The fog seemed to thicken as I climbed higher, reducing visibility to less than 20 feet in some places. The coffee in my thermos had gone cold, but I sipped it anyway, grateful for the familiar taste. Something about the silence was getting to me, making the hair on my arm stand up despite the humid air. That's when I noticed the first sign that something was wrong. The trail ahead showed signs of recent disturbance, but not the kind we usually see. Normal hikers leave clear boot prints, compressed earth where they've walked. This was different. The ground appeared scraped, as if something heavy had been dragged across it. The marks were wide, maybe 4 feet across, and deep enough to expose the darker soil beneath the surface layer. I crouched down to examine the marks more closely, my flashlight beam cutting through the mist. The edges were clean, too clean for an animal, and there was something else, a faint, sweet metallic smell that reminded me of copper pennies left in the rain. My stomach turned as I realized what it was. Blood, old blood, mixed with something else I couldn't identify. Standing up, I played my flashlight beam across the surrounding vegetation. The undergrowth showed signs of heavy damage, with branches broken at odd angles and leaves stripped clean from their stems. Whatever had passed through here was big, much bigger than a bear or mountain lion. I reached for my radio again, intending to report what I'd found. But the static had grown worse. Through the white noise, I could barely make out Sarah's voice, the words broken and distorted. Peter, can't signal. Careful. Then, nothing but dead air. The logical part of my brain said to turn back, to return to the station and bring back a team to investigate. But something kept me moving forward, a combination of duty and morbid curiosity that would prove to be my almost undoing. The trail curved ahead, disappearing into a particularly dense patch of fog. As I approached, I noticed something odd about the mist. It seemed to be moving against the wind, swirling in patterns that defied natural air currents. The temperature dropped noticeably, my breath forming visible clouds in the suddenly frigid air. That's when I heard it, a sound that didn't belong in these woods. A low, rhythmic thumping, like a massive heart beating somewhere in the fog ahead. The sound seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once, reverberating through the ground beneath my feet. I switched off my flashlight, years of ranger training kicking in. In situations like this, light can give away your position, while doing little to help you see what's out there. My eyes adjusted to the dim natural light filtering through the fog, and I waited, barely breathing. The thumping grew louder, more distinct. Mixed with it now was another sound, a wet, sliding noise like something large moving through the underbrush. The sweet metallic smell grew stronger, almost overwhelming. I pressed myself against a large cedar tree, trying to make myself as small as possible. Through the fog, I caught glimpses of movement. Something massive was moving parallel to the trail, just out of clear sight. The vegetation parted like water around it, branches snapping with sharp cracks that echoed through the silence. Then it stopped. The thumping ceased, replaced by a sound that turned my blood to ice, deep, rhythmic breathing, the kind that suggests something large testing the air for scent. I held my own breath, pressing harder against the rough bark of the cedar. The fog seemed to thin for just a moment, offering a brief glimpse of what lurked within. What I saw in that instant defied everything I knew about the natural world. A shape, vaguely humanoid but wrong in every possible way. Its proportions twisted and exaggerated like a child's drawing brought to horrible life. But it was the eyes that haunted me, not the glowing red orbs of campfire stories, but dark, intelligent eyes that spoke of an ancient hunger. Eyes that had watched countless generations of humans pass through these woods. Eyes that knew exactly what they were looking for. In that moment, I understood why we'd found no signs of struggle at the campsites. What chance did even experienced hikers have against something that could move through fog like it was part of it? Something that had perhaps been hunting these trails since before the first European settlers arrived. The shape withdrew into the mist, but I knew it wasn't gone. It was hunting, and I was about to become its next target. The survival instinct is a curious thing. In moments of extreme danger, the human mind can process information with extraordinary clarity, while simultaneously making incredibly poor decisions. Standing there, pressed against that cedar tree with my heart threatening to burst from my chest, I made what was arguably the worst decision of my ranger career. I moved. The rational explanation for my movement was simple. I needed to get back to the ranger station and report what I'd seen. The irrational truth was that I couldn't bear another second of being watched by those intelligent, hungry eyes. My feet carried me forward before my brain could fully process the consequences of my action. The response was immediate. The creature's breathing shifted from slow and methodical to sharp and excited. The fog around me seemed to pulse with renewed energy, thickening until I could barely see 3 feet ahead. The temperature dropped even further, frost forming on the vegetation despite the September warmth. I ran with the desperate energy of prey, no longer caring about stealth or protocol. The trail beneath my feet felt different, somehow less solid than it should have been. Every root and rock seemed positioned to trip me, as if the forest itself had allied with my pursuer. Behind me, the creature moved with terrible purpose, its footfalls sending vibrations through the earth that I could feel in my bones. The fog played tricks with distance and direction. Landmarks I'd known for years appeared in the wrong places, forcing me to make split-second decisions about which way to turn. The trail forked unexpectedly, a junction I knew shouldn't have been there, left or right. The wrong choice would lead to certain death. The creature's presence grew closer, its breathing now accompanied by a sound like wet leather stretching. I chose left, ducking under a low-hanging branch and scrambling up a steep incline. The ground was treacherous, loose shale sliding under my boots. Each step threatened to send me tumbling backward into those waiting arms. As I climbed, the fog began to thin slightly, offering brief glimpses of my surroundings. I recognized this section of the gorge. I was heading toward the old fire lookout tower. If I could reach it, I might have a chance. The metal structure would at least offer some protection, and the emergency radio there might still work. The creature seemed to sense my plan. Its pursuit became more aggressive, the measured pace giving way to faster, more urgent movements. Branches cracked like gunshots behind me. That wet, sliding sound grew louder, accompanied now by something new, a deep, resonant sound that might have been laughter if it hadn't been so utterly inhuman. I risked a glance over my shoulder, a mistake that nearly ended my life. The fog had parted just enough to reveal my pursuer in its full horror. The thing I'd glimpsed earlier hadn't prepared me for the reality of what was hunting me. Its body seemed to shift and flow like the fog itself, the pale skin rippling over impossible musculature. Those long, jointed arms reached for me, fingers extending like pale worms. But it was the face that stopped my breath. Where features should have been, there was instead a kind of suggestion of a face, as if something was wearing a mask made of translucent skin. Dark patches that might have been eyes studied me with predatory intelligence. Below them, a mouth opened in a grin that contained far too many teeth, arranged in concentric circles like some deep-sea nightmare. The sight gave me a burst of speed born of pure terror. The lookout tower was visible now, its metal frame emerging from the fog like a skeleton. 50 yards, 40, 30. My lungs burned with each breath, the thin air at this elevation making every step harder. The creature's next sound was unlike anything I'd heard before. A high, keening wail that seemed to pierce directly into my brain. My vision blurred, and for a moment, I lost my footing. The ground rushed up to meet me, and I rolled, somehow managing to turn the fall into a controlled tumble that carried me the last few yards to the tower's base. The metal stairs clanged under my feet as I took them 3 at a time. Behind me, the creature hesitated. Something about the tower seemed to give it pause. I reached the top platform and slammed through the door, throwing the old metal bolt across just as something heavy impacted the other side. The lookout room was small, maybe 12 feet square, with windows on all sides offering a panoramic view of the fog-shrouded gorge. The emergency radio sat on its shelf, covered in dust, but hopefully still functional. I grabbed the handset and began transmitting on all frequencies. "This is Ranger Riker at Lookout 7. I need immediate assistance. There's something—" I stopped, realizing how insane I would sound. How did one describe what was currently circling the tower like a shark, its long limbs occasionally becoming visible through the fog? The radio crackled, Sarah's voice cutting through the static. "Peter, what's your situation? Over." Outside, the creature had gone quiet. Too quiet. I moved to the window, trying to spot it through the swirling mist. The fog had become so thick, it was like looking through milk glass. Then I noticed something that made my blood run cold. The fog wasn't just surrounding the tower. It was seeping in through every crack and crevice, bringing with it that sweet metallic smell. And in that moment, I realized the creature hadn't been circling the tower at all. It had been climbing it. The realization that the creature was scaling the tower changed everything. The metal walls that had seemed like protection now felt like a trap, boxing me in with nowhere to run. The fog continued its inexorable invasion through every seam and joint in the structure, bringing with it a bone-deep cold that made my teeth chatter. The emergency radio crackled again, Sarah's voice more urgent now. "Peter, do you copy? What's your situation? We're sending backup, but I need to know what we're dealing with." Her words were starting to break up, the signal degrading as the supernatural fog thickened around the tower's antenna. I grabbed the handset, knowing this might be my last chance to communicate. "Sarah, listen carefully. There's something up here. It's not natural. Tell the search teams to stay away unless they're heavily armed. It's what's been taking the hikers. It's—" The radio died with a burst of static, leaving me alone with the sounds of metal groaning under impossible weight. The tower swayed slightly, and I heard the distinctive sound of claws scraping against steel. The creature was testing the structure, searching for weaknesses. Despite its size, it moved with unsettling precision, each movement calculated and deliberate. This wasn't just a predator, it was intelligent, maybe even more intelligent than its prey. I did a quick inventory of my resources: flashlight, knife, half-empty thermos of cold coffee, and my ranger's first aid kit. Nothing that would be particularly effective against whatever was out there. The lookout's emergency cache yielded an old flare gun with 2 rounds and some matches. Not much, but better than nothing. The temperature dropped another 10 degrees. Frost patterns began forming on the windows, beautiful and terrifying in their complexity. They seemed to form shapes, faces, figures, scenes of violence that disappeared as quickly as they formed. The fog inside the room had become so thick I could barely see from one side to the other. Then the scratching stopped. The sudden silence was somehow worse than the noise had been. I moved to the center of the room, flare gun ready, turning slowly to watch all directions. The fog parted slightly, revealing glimpses of the landscape below. The gorge looked different now, transformed by the supernatural mist into something ancient and malevolent. A shadow passed across one window, then another. The creature was circling the tower at my level now, moving with impossible grace along the narrow maintenance walkway. Through the frosted glass, I could see its silhouette, a twisted parody of human form, its proportions shifting and flowing like smoke. The first impact nearly knocked me off my feet. The creature struck the tower's corner with enough force to bend the metal frame. The second hit came from the opposite side, then another and another. It was systematically testing the structure's integrity, using its intelligence to find the weakest points. I realized with growing horror that this wasn't just a hunt. It was playing with me. It could have broken through at any time, but it was drawing out the process, feeding on my fear as much as it intended to feed on my flesh. The fog continued to thicken, and with it came whispers, voices speaking in languages that had been dead for centuries, telling stories of other hunts, other victims. The tower groaned again, and this time I heard the distinct sound of metal giving way. A seam had split in one corner, creating a gap just wide enough for those long, pale fingers to probe through. They moved with horrible purpose, testing the air, sensing my presence. The fog seemed to respond to their movement, swirling and condensing around them like eager courtiers around a king. I raised the flare gun, knowing I would only get one chance. The fingers withdrew, and for a moment, everything was still. Then the wall exploded inward with a screech of torn metal, and the creature began to pour itself through the gap, its body moving in ways that defied physics and sanity. The flare gun's report was deafening in the confined space. The red phosphorus burst caught the creature directly in its twisted face, illuminating its features in harsh crimson light. For the first time I saw it clearly, and understanding nearly broke my mind. Its face was a collection of faces, human features stretched and combined into a nightmare collage. I recognized expressions of terror frozen in its skin, and realized with sickening clarity that these were the faces of its victims. Somehow absorbed into its being, the creature recoiled from the light and heat, emitting a sound that could have been pain or rage or both. The flare continued to burn, casting wild shadows that danced across the walls. In that strobing red light, I made my decision. There was nowhere left to run, nowhere to hide. The tower was compromised, and help, if it was coming at all, would arrive too late. I did the only thing I could do. I ran straight at the creature, shoulder lowering, aiming for the gap it had created. It was a move born of desperation, the kind of thing that only works because it's so completely unexpected. For a crucial second, the creature hesitated, perhaps surprised by its prey turning predator. That second was all I needed. I hit the opening at full speed, feeling cold flesh give way before me. Then I was through, out in the open air, with nothing between me and the ground but 40 feet of fog-shrouded space. Sometimes the only way to escape a predator is to do something so completely insane that it disrupts their hunting pattern. As I fell through the mist, I had time for one last thought. I really hoped I was right about what lay below. In the fraction of a second between jumping and impact, time seemed to slow down. I'd spent years memorizing every detail of this section of the gorge, and if my calculations were right, there should have been a maintenance platform about 20 feet below the lookout tower. The fog made it impossible to see, but I had to trust my knowledge. It was either that or become another face in the creature's grotesque collection. The platform caught me harder than I expected, the metal grating slamming into my shoulder with enough force to drive the air from my lungs. Pain exploded through my left side, but there wasn't time to assess the damage. Above me, the creature let out a sound that started as a roar and transformed into something like radio static, a noise that didn't belong in nature. The maintenance platform wasn't meant to be a permanent structure. It was a simple metal grating attached to the tower's support beams, used by workers to access the lower sections for repairs. As I rolled to my feet, I could feel it swaying under my weight. The fog had followed me down, curling around my ankles like hungry fingers. Looking up, I saw the creature emerge from the tower. It moved like liquid mercury, its body flowing around the metal framework as if gravity was merely a suggestion. Those long arms reached out, testing the air, and I knew I had only seconds before it would be on me. The second flare was still in my pocket, but I needed to make it count. The platform had a narrow maintenance ladder that led to the ground, but climbing down would make me an easy target. Instead, I moved to the edge and looked out over the gorge. The fog had created a false bottom, making it impossible to judge the true distance to the ground. But I knew there was a steep slope below, covered in loose shale and scattered vegetation. It would be a dangerous descent, but possible if I could control my slide. The creature dropped onto the platform behind me, its weight causing the entire structure to groan and tilt. I turned to face it, drawing the flare gun with my good arm. In the diffused light, its body seemed to pulse with an inner luminescence, like bioluminescent creatures in the deep ocean. The faces in its skin shifted and changed, mouths opening in silent screams. "You've been hunting here for a long time, haven't you?" I found myself speaking, though I'm not sure why. Maybe it was the ranger in me, trying to understand even this impossible thing. "The Native Americans knew about you. That's why they had all those warnings about the fog." The creature paused, cocking its head in an almost human gesture. For a moment, I thought I saw something like recognition in those dark eyes. Then its mouth opened, revealing those concentric rings of teeth, and I knew the time for understanding was over. This was a predator, and I was prey. I fired the second flare directly into its mouth. The creature's reaction was immediate and violent. It reared back, clawing at its face as the phosphorus burned. The platform lurched dangerously, its supports beginning to tear away from the tower. I didn't wait to see what would happen next. Taking advantage of the creature's distraction, I turned and jumped again, this time aiming for the slope below. The fog parted around me as I fell, and for a brief moment, I could see the ground rushing up to meet me. I hit the loose shale at an angle, immediately tucking into a roll to disperse the impact. The world became a chaos of tumbling rocks and pain as I slid down the steep incline. Every impact sent fresh waves of agony through my injured shoulder, but I forced myself to stay conscious, trying to control my descent. Above me, I heard the screech of tearing metal as the maintenance platform finally gave way. When I finally came to a stop at the bottom of the slope, I was battered and bleeding, but alive. The fog was thinner here, allowing me to see maybe 30 feet in any direction. The creature's inhuman screams had stopped, replaced by an eerie silence broken only by the sound of falling rocks. Pushing myself to my feet, I began moving as quickly as I could through the underbrush, heading for the main trail. My shoulder was definitely dislocated, and various cuts and bruises made every step painful, but survival instinct kept me going. I knew the creature wasn't dead, something that ancient and powerful wouldn't be stopped by a couple of flares and a fall. The fog continued to follow me, maintaining a constant distance like a patient hunter. It seemed to be waiting for something, perhaps for me to tire or make a mistake. As I stumbled through the forest, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being herded, guided toward something. But what choice did I have? The only way out was forward, through whatever trap the creature was setting. That's when I heard the voices, human voices, calling my name. The search team Sarah had promised was coming to help, and suddenly I realized with horrible clarity exactly what the creature had been waiting for. The sound of approaching voices filled me with a dread unlike anything I'd experienced in my years as a ranger. My fellow rangers were walking into a trap, and I was the bait. Their flashlight beams cut through the fog like searchlights, creating ghostly columns in the mist. I could make out at least 4 distinct voices, probably the standard search and rescue team configuration. Every instinct screamed at me to warn them, to shout for them to run. But I knew that would only draw the creature to them faster. The fog was already moving with purpose, tendrils of mist reaching out toward the approaching lights like hungry fingers. I had to think this through carefully. Rushing in would only get us all killed. I pressed myself against a large boulder, trying to control my breathing despite the pain in my shoulder. From this position, I could see the search team's lights moving through the trees about 100 yards away. They were following standard search patterns, maintaining proper spacing, and calling out at regular intervals. Under normal circumstances, this would be exactly the right approach. But these weren't normal circumstances. The fog began to thicken between me and the search team, and I noticed something that made my blood run cold. The mist wasn't just obscuring vision, it was actively creating false images. I could see shapes that looked like human figures moving through the trees, mirror images of the search team appearing and disappearing. The creature was using the fog to confuse and separate them. "Peter, can you hear me?" It was Mike Rodriguez's voice, a veteran ranger I'd worked with for years. He was too experienced to fall for normal predator tricks, but this was something entirely different. Through gaps in the fog, I could see him signaling to the others, directing them to spread out further. Exactly what the creature wanted. I needed to warn them, but in a way that wouldn't give away their position to the creature. Then I remembered something from my early ranger training, our emergency whistle codes. One long blast followed by two short meant danger, retreat immediately. It wasn't much, but it might be enough to make them stop and regroup. Pulling my whistle from my belt, I took a deep breath. The sound cut through the fog like a knife, the pattern clear and unmistakable. The searching lights stopped moving, and I heard Mike's sharp command, "Hold position!" For a moment, everything was still. Even the fog seemed to pause, as if surprised by this new development. Then I heard it, that wet sliding sound coming from somewhere above. The creature was moving through the trees, using the canopy for cover. It had adapted its hunting strategy based on our actions, showing again that terrible intelligence. The search team had drawn together, following protocol for an unknown threat. Their lights swept the surrounding forest, but they were looking in the wrong direction. Nobody ever looks up in the forest at night. It's not where we expect danger to come from. I noticed the fog was behaving differently now. Instead of spreading out evenly, it was forming distinct patterns, creating corridors and paths through the forest. The creature was using it to channel the search team's movement, subtly directing them toward a natural depression in the landscape where they would be trapped. Making a decision, I pulled out my spare flashlight and began signaling through the fog. 3 short flashes, pause, 3 short flashes. It was an old ranger code meaning unsafe ground ahead. Mike would recognize it, even if the others didn't. I saw his light pause, then repeat the pattern back to me. He understood. The creature must have sensed that its trap was being disrupted. The fog surged forward suddenly, becoming so thick that all visibility was lost. The temperature dropped dramatically, and that high-pitched keening sound filled the air again. Through the white wall of mist, I heard shouts of surprise and confusion from the search team. What happened next seemed to unfold in slow motion. A dark shape dropped from the canopy, its long limbs unfolding like some horrible spider. But Mike had been ready. The blast of his shotgun lit up the fog like lightning, and the creature's screech of pain was very different from its hunting cry. They had come prepared for something dangerous, even if they hadn't known exactly what. The fog churned with violent energy as the creature retreated, leaving behind something that looked like silver mercury where the shotgun pellets had struck it. The search team's lights converged on the spot, and I heard gasps of shock as they saw what they were dealing with. Training and protocol can only prepare you for so much. I took advantage of the creature's distraction to move toward the team, but I knew this wasn't over. We had wounded it, yes, but also made it angry. And somehow, I knew that an angry, ancient predator was far more dangerous than a hunting one. The fog was already beginning to move again, more purposefully this time, and the temperature was dropping even further. This wasn't going to be a rescue anymore. It was going to be a fight for survival. The reunion with the search team was brief and tense. Mike's face was grim as he quickly assessed my injuries while keeping his shotgun ready. The other rangers, Sarah, Tom, and Lisa, formed a defensive circle, their own weapons trained on the surrounding fog. They had come prepared for a mountain lion or bear, bringing the heavy firearms we usually kept locked away. But they were running low on ammunition after that first encounter. "What in God's name is that thing, Peter?" Mike's voice was steady, but I could hear the undertone of fear. He'd been a ranger for 20 years and had never seen anything like this. Before I could answer, the temperature plummeted again. Frost began forming on our clothing and equipment. The fog condensed into shapes that seemed almost solid, creating walls around us. We were being corralled, guided toward something. Sarah's radio crackled to life, but instead of normal static, it emitted that same keening sound we'd heard before. All of our electronic equipment began malfunctioning simultaneously, flashlights flickering, compasses spinning wildly. The creature was learning, adapting, using its influence over the environment to cut off our technology. It's been here longer than any of us, I explained quickly, wincing as Mike helped stabilize my shoulder. The Native Americans knew about it. It's what's been taking the hikers. It uses the fog to hunt, to confuse its prey. And it's intelligent. As if in response to my words, the fog began to take on more defined shapes. Faces formed in the mist, the missing hikers, their expressions frozen in terror. The creature was showing us its trophies, perhaps attempting to demoralize us before its final attack. That's when Tom noticed something crucial. The fog. It's avoiding the shotgun pellets. He was right. Where the silver mercury substance had spilled on the ground, the fog curved away, leaving clear spaces. It's not just wounded by them, Lisa added, her scientific mind working through the implications. It's actually repelled by the metal. The pellets must be lead and silver shot. Old ammunition from our emergency cache. A plan began to form. The creature was ancient, powerful, but not invulnerable. Like many things from old legends, it had a weakness to certain materials. We had limited ammunition, but maybe we could use it to create a safe passage out. The creature seemed to sense our realization. The fog surged forward with new urgency, and through the swirling mist, we caught glimpses of that terrible form moving closer, its body shifting and flowing like liquid mercury. The faces in its skin were more distinct now, mouths moving in silent screams. "Form a line," Mike commanded. "Conserve ammunition. Only shoot when you have a clear target. We're going to make a path back to the main trail." We began moving as a unit, using our remaining shotgun shells to create clear zones in the fog. The creature attacked multiple times, its long limbs lashing out from unexpected angles. But each time the silver shot drove it back, leaving trails of that mercury-like substance in its wake. The main trail was less than a quarter-mile away, but it felt like an eternity. The fog grew thicker with each step and the cold became almost unbearable. The creature's attacks grew more desperate, more frenzied. It was losing its calculating intelligence to raw hunger and rage. Then, disaster struck. Tom's shotgun jammed, leaving a gap in our defense. The creature saw its opportunity and struck with horrifying speed. I saw those long fingers reaching for him, the pale skin rippling with absorbed faces. Without thinking, I threw myself forward, pushing Tom aside. The creature's claws raked across my already injured shoulder, and the pain was like fire. But in that moment of contact, something unexpected happened. I felt a connection, a brief flash of understanding. The creature wasn't just hunting us, it was trying to survive. The modern world was encroaching on its ancient territory, and it was adapting the only way it knew how. That moment of connection gave Mike the opening he needed. He fired his last shell directly into the creature's center mass. The blast caught it mid-transformation, and for the first time, we heard it make an almost human sound, a cry of pain and loss that echoed through the gorge. The fog began to dissipate, pulling back into the deeper parts of the forest. The creature's form became less distinct, more like smoke than solid matter. It retreated into the shadows, leaving behind only that silver substance and an overwhelming sense of ancient sadness. The official report listed the incident as an encounter with an unknown predator, possibly a new species of mountain lion. The silver substance we collected was logged as an unidentified biological material and disappeared into some government laboratory. The missing hikers were never found. My shoulder healed, though it aches when fog rolls in. I still work as a ranger in the Columbia River Gorge, but I'm more cautious now. The creature survived, we all know it did. Sometimes, on particularly foggy days, I catch glimpses of something moving through the mist, testing the boundaries of its territory. The other rangers and I have come to an understanding with it. We mark the trails with small caches of silver shot, creating safe zones for hikers. In return, it seems to stay in the deeper wilderness, hunting deer and elk instead of humans. It's an uneasy truce, but it works. The Native Americans were right all along. There are ancient things in this world, things that don't fit into our modern understanding. The fog in the Columbia River Gorge doesn't sit still because it's alive, not just with one creature, but with memories of a time when the wilderness was truly wild, and humans were not always at the top of the food chain. I still check the weather reports every morning, paying special attention to the fog forecasts. And when hikers ask me about the local legends, I tell them to stay on the marked trails and be off the mountain before dark. Some things are better left undisturbed, living in that space between myth and reality, between the fog and the forest. But sometimes, on quiet nights when the mist rolls in, I find myself thinking about that moment of connection with the creature. In its own way, it was as scared of us as we were of it, an ancient being watching its world change, adapting to survive. And I wonder if there are other things out there, hidden in the wild places of the world, waiting to remind us that nature still holds mysteries we can't explain. Peter Riker, Columbia River Gorge, National Scenic Area, September 2003. I'll never forget that first winter in Denali. 3 months into my new job as a backcountry ranger at Alaska's most remote outpost, and already questioning every life decision that led me here. The name's Kuyani. It means one who walks far in Dena'ina. My grandmother gave me that name, though I never felt worthy of it until I took this post. The Toklat Ranger Station sits 92 miles into the park, accessible only by bush plane during winter. My cabin perches on a small rise overlooking Primrose Lake, a crystal blue expanse that freezes solid by November. When the clouds part, Denali herself looms on the horizon, indifferent to the tiny humans who dare trespass on her domain. I came here running from something, don't we all? After 10 years in Seattle emergency services, I'd seen enough broken bodies and shattered lives. The final straw came when we responded to a bus crash. 23 dead, including a family of 4 I'd pulled from the wreckage. The youngest, just 3 years old, died in my arms, while I whispered useless comfort. 2 weeks later, I applied for the most isolated ranger position in the National Park Service. You understand what isolation means at Toklat, right? My supervisor Monroe had asked during the interview. 6 months without seeing another human during winter rotation, radio contact only. Nearest help is 4 hours by air, weather permitting, which it often doesn't. That was precisely what I wanted. Silence, solitude, space to stitch my fraying sanity back together. The first 2 months passed in blissful monotony. Daily temperature recordings, wildlife observations, equipment maintenance. I found peace in the routine, in the absolute quiet broken only by wind through spruce needles and occasional wolf howls across the valley. Until the tracks appeared. I noticed them my 3rd month, returning from checking the western boundary. Massive impressions in the snow leading directly to my cabin. At first I assumed moose. We get monsters up here, shoulders higher than a tall man's head. But something felt wrong. The stride length exceeded anything I'd documented, nearly 6 feet between prints. And the shape, not quite human, not quite bear. I radioed Monroe that evening during our weekly check-in. Probably just a large grizzly passing through, he said. They don't fully hibernate up there. Some wake periodically, especially males. In February, with 3 feet of snow, and these tracks weren't ambling like a bear, they were purposeful. Take photographs next time. Document everything. Monroe's voice crackled through static. And Kuyani, remember protocol if it is a bear, no heroes. That night I woke to a sound I still struggle to describe, somewhere between a deep, resonant wood knock and a guttural vocalization that echoed across the frozen lake. I bolted upright, grabbing my headlamp and service pistol. The thermometer outside my window read -28. No animal should be active in that cold. I swept my beam across the cabin's single room, kitchen area, desk with weather equipment, narrow bed, finding nothing disturbed. The knocking came again, 3 distinct impacts that seemed to vibrate through the cabin's logs. I moved to the window, breath clouding the glass. Moonlight transformed the landscape into monochrome silver. Primrose Lake stretched vast and empty, bordered by black spruce sentinels. Nothing moved, yet I couldn't escape the overwhelming sensation of being watched. Standing motionless at the window, I gradually became aware of something at the forest edge. Not movement exactly, but a wrongness in the tree line. A deeper patch of shadow where shadows shouldn't gather. As my eyes adjusted, the shadow resolved into a massive silhouette, impossibly tall and broad, standing upright among the trees. I blinked, and it vanished. Sleep became impossible. I stoked the wood stove and reviewed the Denali Wildlife Manual, finding nothing that matched what I'd glimpsed. Around dawn, exhaustion finally claimed me. I woke to brilliant sunlight and fresh resolve. The logical explanation, exhaustion combined with isolation, was playing tricks on my perception. I'd been in Alaska long enough to know the wilderness manufactures fear from mundane sources. I'd document the tracks properly, set up trail cameras, gather evidence like the scientist I was trained to be. Outside, fresh snow had erased yesterday's tracks. I trudged through knee-deep powder to check the perimeter. Nothing seemed disturbed until I reached the woodpile behind the cabin. The massive logs I'd carefully stacked were scattered across the clearing, not knocked over as a bear might do foraging for insects, but deliberately unstacked and arranged in a rough semicircle. At the center lay the partially consumed carcass of a wolf, ribs splayed open, internal organs missing. No scavenger I knew would kill a healthy wolf, much less display it this way. I photographed everything, my hands trembling slightly. Despite the brutal cold, sweat trickled down my spine as I collected samples from the carcass. That evening, the radio crackled with an emergency transmission from Monroe. "Kuyani, we've got hikers missing near your sector. 2 males, experienced outdoorsmen. Their emergency beacon activated 48 hours ago near Refuge Valley, then went silent. Weather's closing in. Can't get aircraft out until it clears. You're the closest personnel. Can you investigate at first light?" I stared at the radio. Refuge Valley lay 15 miles northeast, a grueling trek through rugged terrain even in good conditions. With 3 feet of snow and temperatures plummeting below -30 at night, those men will die waiting for weather to clear, Monroe added grimly. "I'll head out at first light," I confirmed, already calculating supplies needed for emergency rescue. "Kuyani," Monroe hesitated. "There's something else. This is the 3rd group that's gone missing in that region this winter. Previous 2 were never found." I glanced at the window, darkness gathering outside. Something moved at the forest edge, a massive shadow detaching from deeper shadows. I killed my cabin lights and watched as it traversed the clearing with an unnatural, fluid grace that belied its enormous size. "I'll find them," I promised Monroe, wondering if I was lying to us both. The radio went silent. Outside, the thing that was neither bear nor man paused at the center of the clearing, raised its head as if sensing my gaze, and melted back into the wilderness. Dawn arrived with bitter clarity, the thermometer reading 37 below. I layered methodically, moisture-wicking base, insulating mid-layers, windproof shell, knowing a mistake in these temperatures meant death. Into my pack went emergency supplies, medical kit, shelter materials, extra food, satellite phone, despite its unreliability in these mountains, and signaling equipment. My service rifle felt reassuring against my shoulder. For bears, I told myself, ignoring the memory of that silhouette's distinctly un-Ursine proportions. The trek to Refuge Valley demanded everything I had. Deep snow covered a landscape designed to kill the unprepared. I followed frozen creek beds where possible, snowshoed across meadows, and carefully navigated windswept passes where one misstep meant a 1,000-foot fall. By late afternoon, I reached the coordinates Monroe had provided. A stand of ancient spruce sheltered a small clearing where the missing hikers had apparently made camp. Or someone had. The site was unmistakable. Tent poles bent at unnatural angles protruded from drifted snow. Shredded fabric flapped in the wind. Personal items scattered across 30 yards told a story of violence. "Ben? Marcus?" I called, knowing no one would answer. I photographed everything, moving systematically through the site. The destruction suggested explosive force. The tent hadn't merely collapsed but appeared blown outward from within. Methodically, I marked items: a torn backpack, cooking equipment, a cracked satellite phone. Blood speckled the snow in places, frozen burgundy against pristine white. Most disturbing was what appeared to be a shelter constructed from broken branches and torn equipment. Not the work of experienced hikers, but something crude and instinctual. A terrible parody of human construction techniques. As dusk approached, I knew I couldn't return to my cabin before dark. I established camp a quarter-mile away, wanting distance from that violated space. Following protocol, I built a small, contained fire, though every instinct screamed that announcing my presence was dangerous. That night brought sounds no Alaska veteran could explain, wood knocks echoing through valleys where no human walked, followed by low, modulated howls unlike any wolf or windstorm. They seemed to come from multiple directions, as if several creatures called to each other across miles of wilderness. I huddled in my tent, service rifle across my lap, and tried to convince myself the missing hikers had simply wandered off after a bear destroyed their camp. Morning came with heavy cloud cover threatening snow. I forced down freeze-dried breakfast and broke camp efficiently. Following what might have been a trail of disturbed snow, I pushed deeper into Refuge Valley. 3 hours later, I found the first body. He lay half buried in snow beneath a rocky overhang, his climbing harness still attached. The official report would later identify him as Benjamin Schaefer, 32, from Oregon. But reports wouldn't capture the rictus of pure terror frozen on his face, nor the bizarre pattern of injuries. His chest had been crushed by what appeared to be massive hands, with distinct finger impressions visible in the bruising. More disturbing were the bite marks. Not from any recognized predator, the teeth pattern almost human but larger, more powerful. I documented everything with mechanical precision, my ranger training overriding horror. Cold equations of survival dictated I couldn't carry his body out. I marked the GPS coordinates and covered him with stones where possible, a gesture toward dignity in this merciless place. Of the second hiker, Marcus Foster, I found only scattered equipment and a boot containing partial remains. As I prepared to return to my cabin with this grim evidence, heavy snow began falling. Within minutes, visibility dropped to mere yards. I consulted my map, calculated bearings, and began the long journey home with weather deteriorating rapidly. 2 miles in, I realized I was being stalked. Nothing obvious, no footsteps behind me or dark shape on my periphery. But 20 years in wilderness teaches you to recognize the weight of observation. The forest had gone silent in a way that indicated large predator presence. I quickened my pace, abandoning stealth for speed. Crossing a frozen stream, I spotted them, tracks emerging from the tree line, following my path. The impressions dwarfed my snowshoe prints, easily 18 inches long, with 5 distinct toe depressions. No mistaking them for bear now. These were bipedal tracks, made by something that walked upright. The snow intensified, becoming a white wall that disoriented and blinded. Navigation became impossible. Consulting my GPS, I realized I'd veered off course toward unfamiliar territory. With darkness approaching and temperatures plummeting, I needed shelter immediately. Providence appeared in the form of an old trapper's cabin, half buried in snow. These structures dot Alaska's backcountry, emergency refuges maintained by rangers and locals. This one hadn't seen maintenance in years. Roof partially collapsed, door hanging by one hinge, but it represented survival. I cleared the entrance and slipped inside, securing the broken door with rope from my pack. The single room contained a rusted wood stove, broken table, and crude bunk covered with moldering blankets. Better than freezing to death in the storm. It took precious minutes to get a fire started with damp wood. As warmth gradually returned to my extremities, I assessed my situation. The storm had become a full blizzard, howling around the cabin's fragile walls. Radio contact would be impossible. I was effectively cut off until conditions improved. Night descended with unnatural swiftness. I arranged emergency lighting, prepared minimal rations, and tried to establish communication with headquarters. Nothing but static answered. The knocking began shortly after midnight. 3 distinct impacts against the cabin's west wall. Pause. 3 more. My hand moved to my rifle as I extinguished my light, allowing night vision to develop. Something massive moved outside, its shadow momentarily blocking the faint moonlight filtering through cracks in the boarded window. The door handle rattled, not randomly, but with deliberate manipulation, testing the strength of my hasty barricade. I steadied my breathing, aiming at the door. If it came through, I'd have seconds to react. The pressure on the door ceased. Silence descended, broken only by wind. Just as my muscles began relaxing, an inhuman scream tore through the night, rage and hunger distilled into sound. The cabin's wall shuddered under massive impact. Wooden boards cracked but held. I fired a warning shot through the damaged wall, hoping to drive the creature back. The response was immediate, not retreat, but escalation. Both windows shattered inward as the assault intensified. Through gaps in the broken boards, I glimpsed massive limbs covered in dark hair, hands large enough to engulf a human skull. My next shot wasn't a warning. The hollow point round struck something solid. A roar of pain echoed across the valley, followed by heavy footsteps retreating into forest. For hours I maintained vigilance, expecting the creature's return. Instead, a new sound emerged from the darkness. Voices. Human voices, murmuring just beyond comprehension. They seemed to come from all directions, calling in sing-song tones. Hallucinations from stress and cold, I told myself, knowing the nearest humans were days away. Yet the voices persisted until dawn, keeping me balanced on a knife edge of alertness and exhaustion. Morning brought clearing skies and an unsettling discovery. The snow around the cabin bore evidence of not one creature but several, at least 3 distinct track patterns of varying sizes, all showing the same impossible foot structure. They had surrounded the cabin completely, approaching from different directions in what could only be described as coordinated movement. Most disturbing was what they left behind. 20 yards from the cabin stood a crude arrangement of broken trees, 3 trunks driven into snow, forming a triangular structure. Hanging from this construction was my missing backpack, the one I'd photographed at the destroyed campsite. I hadn't brought it with me. Something had. The message seemed unmistakable. "We know who you are. We've been watching you all along." The journey back to my ranger station took twice the expected time. I maintained constant vigilance, stopping frequently to scan surroundings and check for pursuit. Though I saw nothing, the sensation of being observed never faded. Radio contact remained impossible until I crested the final ridge overlooking Primrose Lake. Monroe's voice, fragmented by static, conveyed both relief and concern. "Worried when you missed check-in. Storm system. Search team ready." "I found 1 body," I reported mechanically. "Sending coordinates. Second hiker presumed dead. Evidence suggests predator attack." A long pause followed. "What kind of predator?" Monroe finally asked. I stared across the pristine wilderness, stretching to the horizon, beautiful and merciless. The tracks converging on the trapper's cabin, the calculated assault, the suspended backpack. "Unknown," I answered, "but intelligent." My cabin appeared undisturbed when I finally reached it, though that meant little. These creatures, whatever they were, understood doors and windows. They could manipulate objects. The line between animal and something else had blurred beyond recognition. Inside, I barricaded the entrance, covered windows, and collapsed into exhausted sleep that brought no rest. Only fragmented nightmares of massive shapes moving through trees, of being watched by eyes too intelligent for comfort. I woke to radio static. Monroe's voice cut through, uncharacteristically urgent. "Kuyani, need confirmation on your report. You said unknown predator, but described injuries consistent with bear attack. Regional office wants clarification before sending recovery team." The subtext was clear. Writing unknown bipedal creatures with near-human intelligence on an official report would end my career. 20 years in wilderness management had taught me the politics of predator encounters, particularly when they didn't fit established categories. "Presumed large male grizzly," I amended, the lie bitter on my tongue. "Unusual behavior possibly indicating territorial dispute or food scarcity." Monroe's relief was palpable. "Recovery team launches tomorrow if weather holds. They'll extract the body and investigate the site." After signing off, I examined the photographs I'd taken, the destroyed camp, Benjamin Schaefer's crushed body, those massive tracks in the snow. Nothing in my extensive wilderness training explained what I'd encountered. I approached my personal laptop with reluctance. Internet connectivity at Toklat came through a painfully slow satellite uplink, reserved for emergencies and official communications. This qualified as both. Searching bipedal creatures Alaska wilderness produced the expected results. Bigfoot forums, cryptozoology websites, blurry photographs dismissed by science. I'd always considered these tales log or folklore, campfire stories to frighten novices. Now I examined them with disturbing new perspective. Native accounts proved more compelling. Denali itself, originally called Denati, featured prominently in indigenous stories about those who walk like men but are not men. The Koyukon people spoke of territories where hunters never returned, of creatures that mimicked human voices to lure travelers astray. Most unsettling were accounts from other rangers and wilderness professionals, not public records, but stories shared privately among those who spent lifetimes in remote backcountry. Destroyed camps, strange tracks, coordinated stalking behavior from creatures that remained just beyond definitive documentation. My reading was interrupted by 3 distinct knocks on the cabin wall. I extinguished lights immediately, retrieving my rifle with practiced motion. Against regulations, I'd loaded hollow point rounds after returning from Refuge Valley, ammunition designed to stop, not merely wound. Through window cracks, moonlight revealed the clearing empty. Yet the knocking continued. 3 impacts, pause, 3 more. Not random animal investigation, but deliberate communication. It moved systematically around the cabin's perimeter, testing different locations. I maintained absolute stillness, controlling my breathing. The temperature in the cabin had dropped precipitously, my exhaled breaths forming visible clouds. Outside, something scraped against logs, the sound of massive claws or hands moving slowly across wood. The radio crackled unexpectedly, Monroe's voice filling the silence. "Kiani, emergency weather alert. Major system moving in. Recovery team delayed minimum 72 hours. Acknowledge." Before I could respond, a tremendous impact struck the roof, as if something massive had landed above me. Dust and debris shook loose from ceiling beams. The radio died mid-transmission. What followed was psychological warfare. For hours, the creatures circled my cabin, occasionally testing doors and windows but never committing to full assault. They seemed to communicate through those distinctive knocks, answering each other across distances. Twice I heard what sounded disturbingly like my own voice repeating words I'd spoken into the radio earlier, perfect mimicry deployed as lure. Dawn brought momentary respite. The storm Monroe predicted arrived with blinding intensity, visibility reduced to yards. Through swirling snow, I glimpsed dark shapes retreating into forest, 3 distinct figures moving with that same unsettling fluidity. The blizzard might delay the recovery team, but it also confined my visitors to shelter. I seized the opportunity to reinforce my cabin, boarding broken windows, constructing defensive positions, inventorying potential weapons beyond my limited ammunition. During this work, I discovered something lodged between wall logs near the window, a tuft of dark hair unlike anything in my considerable experience with North American wildlife. Coarser than bear fur, longer than moose or wolf, with a structure that appeared almost human, but distinctly not. I sealed it in a sample bag, photographed it beside measurement tools, and added it to growing evidence. The storm raged 3 days, during which the creatures remained absent. I used the time to transcribe detailed accounts of every encounter, preparing the documentation I couldn't include in official reports. If something happened to me, someone might find this record. On the 4th day, as weather cleared, the radio returned to life. "Repeat, recovery team inbound to your coordinates. ETA 3 hours. Prepare landing zone if possible. Acknowledge." I confirmed, relief washing through me. Human contact after weeks of isolation and terror. Evidence that could corroborate my experiences. Perhaps an end to this nightmare. Those hours passed with excruciating slowness. I cleared snow from the helicopter landing area, assembled equipment for the recovery team, and prepared my unofficial documentation. The sample of hair went into my pocket, physical evidence beyond photographs and testimony. 2 hours into this preparation, I heard the knocks again. 3 distinct impacts from the forest edge. They had returned. Through binoculars, I spotted them, not hiding now, but standing openly at tree line. 3 figures of varying height, the largest easily 8 feet tall. Dark hair covered massive frames built for wilderness survival. Most disturbing were their faces, not quite human, not quite animal, but somewhere in evolutionary territory science hadn't categorized. They made no move toward the cabin, content to observe from distance, showing themselves deliberately after days of stealth. The message seemed clear. "We could have taken you at any time." The distant thrum of helicopter rotors scattered them instantly. One moment standing in plain sight, the next vanished into dense forest with impossible speed for creatures their size. The recovery team consisted of 4 rangers and a wildlife biologist named Abernathy. Their arrival transformed my isolated outpost into controlled chaos. Equipment unloaded, communications established, questions fired rapidly about the missing hikers. I provided official coordinates and my amended report about presumed bear activity. Privately, I took Abernathy aside, showing her the hair sample and unaltered photographs. She examined everything with scientific detachment, then fixed me with an unreadable gaze. This follows a pattern. 3 incidents this year in different sectors, all with similar characteristics. You've seen these before? Hope flared that I wasn't alone in my observations. I've seen evidence consistently eliminated from official records, she responded carefully. Tracks documented, then attributed to unidentified large mammals. Hair samples collected, then lost during transport. The Park Service has policy regarding unconventional wildlife encounters. You mean cover-ups? I mean protecting careers and funding, she corrected. Nobody advances by filing reports about creatures science doesn't acknowledge. The recovery team departed that afternoon for Refuge Valley, promising to return within 48 hours. Abernathy took my hair sample for analysis, though her expression suggested limited optimism about its official journey through bureaucratic channels. Alone again, I faced the reality of my situation. The creatures had revealed themselves deliberately. They understood helicopters meant humans. Most disturbing, they'd shown capacity for strategic thinking, for patience. That night I dreamed of dark shapes moving through trees, of massive hands reaching through broken windows. I woke gasping to the now familiar sound of knocking. 3 impacts, pause, 3 more. Outside, the moon illuminated 3 dark silhouettes standing at the forest edge, watching my cabin, watching me, not hiding anymore, letting me know with certainty. This was their territory. I was the intruder, and they wanted me gone. The recovery team's return brought grim confirmation. They'd located Benjamin Schaefer's body where I'd left it, along with scattered remains of his companion. Their official report echoed my amended version, consistent with large ursine predator attack. Science and bureaucracy combining to erase the inexplicable. What they found at the trapper's cabin confirmed my private fears. The structure had been systematically destroyed, not random animal damage, but deliberate deconstruction. Logs pulled apart, door removed intact and carried away. Everything I'd touched disassembled with methodical purpose. We've documented similar destruction at abandoned structures throughout the region, Abernathy admitted privately before their departure. Always following human visitation, always methodical rather than typical predator behavior. She pressed a satellite phone into my hand, more powerful than standard ranger equipment. Official channels are monitored. This connects directly to my research team. If they return, document everything. The helicopter's departure left vacuum silence. Within hours, familiar knocking resumed, no longer testing but announcing presence. 3 impacts against different walls, strategically timed. Communication or intimidation, the message was identical. We remain. That night brought escalation. I woke to the sound of heavy objects being dragged across my cabin roof. Through reinforced windows, I glimpsed massive shapes moving with deliberate purpose. They were constructing something. Morning revealed their work, broken branches and stripped logs, arranged in complex patterns surrounding my cabin. The formations mimicked human construction techniques, but served no obvious functional purpose. Territorial marking, perhaps, or demonstration of intelligence. Most disturbing was the precision. Perfectly symmetrical arrangements no random animal could produce. I photographed everything, transmitting images through Abernathy's secure channel. Her response came hours later. Documented similar structures near other ranger outposts where encounters reported, consistent with territorial display behavior. Subject matter experts suggest non-engagement. Repeat, do not engage. That afternoon they crossed another threshold. I spotted the largest creature standing openly in the clearing, motionless, staring directly at my cabin. Not hiding, not threatening, watching with unnerving patience. When I raised binoculars, it tilted its head, a disconcertingly human gesture of curiosity. Hours passed in this silent standoff. I documented continuously, cataloging physical characteristics now clearly visible: the massive frame covered in dark hair, the unsettling hybridization of ape-like features with distinctly human elements, proportions both familiar and impossible. Most striking were its eyes, not animal eyes, but containing undeniable intelligence. When it finally retreated at dusk, its movement conveyed not fear, but purpose concluded. That night, radio contact with headquarters failed completely. Attempts through regular channels produced only static. Abernathy's satellite phone remained functional, but couldn't connect to routine park frequencies. Whether from storm interference or more troubling causes, I was effectively isolated. The knocking changed pattern, 5 impacts now, rhythmic, repeated hourly throughout the night. Sleep became impossible as tensions escalated toward some inevitable confrontation. Dawn brought discovery that they'd constructed a perimeter of broken trees completely surrounding my cabin. Each post stood 8 feet tall, stripped of branches, driven deep into frozen ground. The formation created unmistakable boundary, not to keep me in, but to mark territory now under dispute. I'd recognized escalating patterns in predator behavior throughout my career. This displayed textbook conflict progression: observation, territorial marking, intimidation displays, and finally, confrontation. We were approaching that final phase. Abernathy's team responded to my transmitted images with unprecedented urgency. Extraction team mobilizing, weather window projected in 36 hours, maintain shelter position until arrival. Those 36 hours stretched human endurance to breaking points. The creatures abandoned stealth entirely, moving openly around the clearing day and night. Their vocalizations evolved from knocks to complex modulated calls exchanged across distances, language by any reasonable definition. Through cabin windows, I watched them systematically dismantle my weather monitoring equipment, examining components with disturbing curiosity. They carried pieces into forest, returning hours later without them. Learning, analyzing, understanding human technology. On the second night, they tested defenses in earnest, not attacking directly, but applying strategic pressure to different entry points: windows, doors, the roof access hatch. Probing for structural weaknesses with methodical patience, I maintained defensive positions, rotating between reinforced windows, conserving ammunition for genuine breach attempts. The psychological toll mounted as hours passed in hyper-vigilant exhaustion. Near dawn, their tactics shifted dramatically. The knocking stopped. Vocalizations ceased. The clearing fell deadly silent. Through night vision equipment, I observed them retreating systematically into forest. A coordinated withdrawal, unlike anything in documented predator behavior. The silence persisted until mid-morning, when a new sound emerged: rhythmic chopping from the ridge overlooking my position. Through binoculars, I spotted the largest creature systematically felling trees, creating what appeared to be a barricade across the only viable helicopter landing zone within miles. They understood extraction was coming. They were actively preventing it. I transmitted urgent updates through Abernathy's channel. Her response chilled me. Behavior consistent with advanced problem-solving capabilities. Subjects demonstrating strategic thinking, not reactive instinct. Extraction team rerouting to secondary LZ. Extend timeline plus 24 hours. Another day in psychological siege. I rationed remaining food and water, calculating survival equations against dwindling supplies. The creatures maintained distance but constant presence. Always visible, always watching. A pressure more effective than direct assault. That evening, weather shifted dramatically. Temperature dropped 30 degrees as Arctic air descended from northern mountains. The cabin's aging wood stove struggled against deepening cold. My breath formed clouds inside as hours passed. At midnight, 3 distinct knocks rattled the door. Not walls this time, but directly against the reinforced entrance. A new communication, a new phase. I raised my rifle, aiming at the center of the door, finger resting near the trigger guard. Through the window adjacent to the entrance, I glimpsed movement. The largest creature positioning itself deliberately in my line of sight. In its massive hands, it held my axe, the tool I'd left outside before departing for Refuge Valley weeks earlier. Our eyes met across the distance. Recognition flowed between species that should never have developed mutual understanding. It raised the axe deliberately, then placed it gently against the cabin wall, not threatening, but demonstrating it could have been used as weapon and wasn't. Communication, deliberate, unmistakable communication. It retreated several paces, then performed something I still struggle to rationalize. It pushed snow into a deliberate pattern before my door. Not random clearing, but shapes with clear intentionality. When finished, it backed away, watching expectantly. Through the window, I examined its creation, crude symbols pressed into snow, 3 vertical lines with horizontal connectors, primitive but unmistakable representation of human stick figures. Beside them, larger figures with distinct characteristics matching the creatures themselves. Between these groupings, a vertical line, boundary, separation, division of territory. The message required no cryptographer. This place is ours. Stay on your side. I remained motionless, processing implications beyond scientific paradigms. The creature watched, waiting for response or acknowledgement. When none came, it repeated the knocking pattern against my door, more insistent now. What do you acknowledge when facing something science claims doesn't exist? What diplomatic protocols apply to creatures occupying evolutionary space between recognized categories? I made my decision based not on ranger training but human instinct. I knocked back, 3 distinct impacts against the inside wall. The effect was immediate. The creature tilted its head, then repeated the pattern with subtle variation. I matched it precisely. For 10 minutes this exchange continued, patterns growing progressively complex, a primitive language developing between species. Communication established, it backed away, rejoining 2 smaller figures at forest edge. Together, they melted into darkness, leaving only their message scraped in snow. The extraction team arrived at dawn, descending by cable from helicopter hovering above blocked landing zone. 4 armed rangers equipped for wilderness extraction secured the perimeter, while Abernathy debriefed me with clinical precision. The structures, the communication attempts, all documented before, she confirmed, examining my photographs. But direct interactive communication, that's unprecedented escalation. They're intelligent, I stated flatly. Not animal intelligence, something else entirely. The official record will show weather damage and unusual bear activity, she replied with practiced neutrality. Your replacement arrives next rotation. You're being reassigned to headquarters, administrative position. Translation, removal from field service. Too much witnessed, too much documented, too dangerous to bureaucracy and established science. As equipment was packed and preparations made for departure, I surveyed the wilderness that had transformed from sanctuary to confrontation zone. The pristine expanse of Primrose Lake, the cabin that had sheltered me through months of isolation, the forest edge where they had stood openly, watching with eyes too aware for comfort. They had withdrawn completely, no evidence remaining of creatures Park Service records refused to acknowledge. Yet I felt their continued presence, watching from distance as humans reclaimed disputed territory. Before boarding the helicopter, I placed my ranger hat on the boundary marker they had constructed. Acknowledgement of territorial claim, respect between species separated by evolutionary paths but united in fundamental understanding. As rotors lifted us skyward, I glimpsed movement at forest edge, 3 dark figures observing our departure, not hiding anymore, standing as equals in their domain. I understood with perfect clarity. They had never been legend or folklore or campfire story. They had always been there, watching from evolutionary shadows as humans claimed wilderness never truly ours. The official report would document bear activity, structural damage from weather, and psychological strain from isolation. Science and bureaucracy erasing unexplainable truth with comfortable fiction. But I knew what I had seen, what I had communicated with, what watched from ancient forests when humans ventured beyond boundaries of established knowledge. And somewhere in Alaska's deepest wilderness, they continued watching, waiting for the next human to discover what I had learned at tremendous cost. We had never been alone. 6 months after extraction from Toklat, I sit in headquarters' fluorescent-lit administrative office, processing equipment requisitions and filing incident reports. The transition from wilderness isolation to bureaucratic confinement represents its own peculiar torture. Officially, I suffered environmental stress response, requiring temporary reassignment pending psychological evaluation. My field notes were classified, photographs archived in restricted access databases. Benjamin Schaefer's death certificate lists animal attack, ursine predator as cause, science and bureaucracy combining to preserve comfortable paradigms. Abernathy visits occasionally, bringing coffee and conversation deliberately vague when others might overhear. Her research continues under innocuous titles like Adaptive Behaviors in Unclassified North American Mammals. We both understand the careful linguistic dance required when discussing subjects officially non-existent. Your hair sample? She mentioned during her last visit. Results came back inconclusive, officially. Unofficially, genetic markers showed primate characteristics combined with unknown sequences. The sample disappeared from the lab 3 days later. Convenient, I observed. Pattern recognition suggests involvement beyond standard bureaucratic procedures, she replied carefully. Interest in these specimens extends beyond scientific curiosity. Translation: someone powerful doesn't want evidence preserved. Winter approaches again. Through office windows, I watch snow accumulating on headquarters' manicured grounds, so different from the wild expanse of Primrose Lake. I dream of dark shapes moving through trees, of knocking patterns against cabin walls, of eyes watching with intelligence science refuses to acknowledge. Monroe visits my desk weekly, evaluating readiness for potential field reactivation. His expression suggests internal conflict between administrative mandates and genuine concern. The new ranger at Toklat? I asked during his last evaluation. Any unusual reports? Something flickered across his features, recognition perhaps or concealed knowledge. Station's been decommissioned, budget cuts, areas designated wilderness preserve now. No human presence authorized. Territory ceded. Acknowledgement of boundaries negotiated through unorthodox diplomacy. I wonder if my hat still marks that boundary line where species reached fragile understanding. Last week, a package arrived through internal mail. No sender indicated, routing information deliberately obscured. Inside, a small carved wooden figure depicting a creature neither fully human nor animal. Abernathy's work, I suspect, though she denies involvement. With the carving came a topographical map marking unsanctioned ranger outposts throughout Alaska's deepest wilderness, areas where official records document unusual predator activity, territories where boundaries between species remain contested or negotiated through means science hasn't categorized. Considering field reassignment, Monroe asked today, noting the map spread across my desk. Just studying terrain, I answered carefully. Maintaining skills. He nodded with suspicious understanding. Some regions benefit from minimal human presence. Natural balance requires respecting established territories. Tonight, as headquarters empties for weekend exodus, I examine transfer request forms with growing resolution. Not Toklat. That boundary stands established. But other regions marked on Abernathy's map, where similar encounters remain undocumented by those capable of understanding their significance. Science advances through observation of unexplained phenomena. Some truths require witnesses willing to venture beyond comfortable paradigms into territories where humans were never meant to be unquestioned masters. I complete the transfer request, specifying remote outpost marking boundary between acknowledged wilderness and something else entirely. Where others might flee from unexplained shadows, I find purpose in documentation, in communication, in understanding intelligence evolved along paths parallel to our own. Through office windows, darkness gathers across parking lot. In that darkness, memory recreates 3 distinct knocks against cabin walls, 3 impacts acknowledging presence across species boundaries. Communication established between intelligences science claims cannot exist. They remain out there, watching from evolutionary shadows as humans venture into territories never truly conquerable. Tonight, I pack equipment for return to wilderness, where comfortable certainties dissolve against evidence too compelling to ignore. Some truths demand witnesses. Some boundaries require acknowledgement. Some intelligence deserves recognition, regardless of forms it inhabits. The transfer request form bears single destination. Checkpoint North, 163 miles beyond last acknowledged ranger station, where reports document destroyed structures, massive tracks in wilderness snow, and distinctive knocking patterns against cabin walls during longest winter nights. Where truth awaits those with courage to acknowledge what watches from ancient forests when science looks away. I am Kiyani, the one who walks far, and I'm going back. The sky stretched endlessly above as I navigated the narrow trail toward my new home. 3 weeks ago, I'd been shuffling paperwork in Anchorage. Now, I stood at the edge of one of the most remote outposts in Denali National Park, feeling both exhilarated and terrified by the isolation. My name is Koyuk, meaning man of the wilderness, in Inupiaq, though I wasn't born with it. I chose it when I took this position, shedding my former identity like old skin. The ranger cabin stood nestled among towering pines, their branches creating a natural canopy. Lake Anaktok stretched before it, still as glass, reflecting the mountains like nature's perfect mirror. This would be my domain for the next 2 years, 20 miles from the nearest outpost, 50 from anything resembling civilization. I set my pack down on the weathered porch, key in hand, and paused to absorb the silence. Not the urban quiet I'd grown accustomed to. This was different, profound, almost deafening in its completeness. The occasional chirp of a distant bird or rustle of leaves only emphasized the vast emptiness surrounding me. Home sweet home, I muttered, pushing open the door to reveal a surprisingly well-maintained interior. One main room with a small kitchen area, wood stove, desk, and communication equipment. A doorway led to a modest bedroom with a simple cot. Basic, functional, isolated. Perfect. My predecessor had left detailed notes about the area's wildlife patterns, weather expectations, and common concerns from the handful of hikers who ventured this far into the wilderness. Nothing unusual, just standard ranger protocols. The final page, however, caught my attention, hastily scrawled at the bottom. Watch the tree line at dusk. Listen to the locals. Some legends have roots. I dismissed it as the musings of someone who'd spent too much time alone. 2 years in isolation would make anyone cryptic. Still, something about those words lingered as I unpacked my supplies. The radio crackled to life, startling me. Anaktok Basin, this is Ranger Control. Do you copy? Over. I fumbled with the receiver. This is Anaktok Basin. Ranger Koyuk speaking. I copy, over. Welcome to the wilderness, Koyuk. Just checking that you arrived safely. Weather reports show a storm system moving in. Make sure you're battened down before nightfall. Over. Understood. Cabin's in good shape. I'll secure everything before dark. Over. Good man. Check in every 48 hours. Control out. The transmission ended, leaving me once again with the profound silence. I finished unpacking, organized my gear, and studied the area maps. The afternoon drifted by as I familiarized myself with the cabin systems, the generator, water purification, emergency protocols. As dusk approached, I remembered the note. Against my better judgment, I found myself standing at the large window, watching the tree line as shadows lengthened across the forest floor. Nothing moved except the occasional bird. I shook my head, feeling foolish. The first drops of rain began tapping against the roof as I heated a simple meal. The storm arrived with surprising ferocity, wind howling through the pines, rain hammering against the cabin walls. I stoked the wood stove and settled in with the logbooks from previous rangers, curious to see if there were any other cryptic notes. Most entries were mundane, wildlife sightings, maintenance issues, weather patterns, but occasionally paragraphs were redacted, blacked out with marker. Official Park Service redactions, judging by the stamp at the bottom of each page. What information warranted censorship in a ranger's daily log? The wind suddenly intensified, screaming around the cabin's corners. I moved to check the window when a deafening crack split the air. A massive pine had fallen across the clearing, missing the cabin by mere feet. Through the rain-streaked glass, I could see its massive trunk and sprawling root system torn from the earth. Lightning hadn't struck it. The tree looked healthy, strong, yet something had uprooted it completely. As I stared, movement caught my eye. a shadow detaching itself from the darkness between the trees. Large, bipedal, hunched. For a moment our eyes seemed to meet across the distance. Then the rain intensified, and whatever I'd seen vanished into the tree line. I convinced myself it was a bear, standing momentarily on its hind legs. Bears were common here, after all. But bears don't stare with purpose. Bears don't deliberately retreat into shadows. And bears don't uproot century-old pines. I secured the cabin's locks, checked the satellite phone, and kept my service weapon close. The storm raged through the night as I pored over maps and documents, learning everything I could about the region's history and reported wildlife. The official materials mentioned nothing unusual, but tucked into the back of the desk drawer, I found a worn journal filled with handwritten accounts from various rangers. Stories of strange tracks, unexplained noises, missing hikers, and through it all, references to the Watcher in the Woods. I'd taken this job to escape, to heal from wounds both physical and mental. After the accident that claimed my climbing partner's life, I'd needed distance from everything and everyone. The Alaska Wilderness Ranger Service had seemed perfect. No one asked questions about my past. No one expected me to talk about what happened on that mountain face. Dawn broke with unusual clarity. The storm had passed, leaving behind a transformed landscape. I surveyed the damage from the porch, numerous fallen branches, debris scattered across the clearing, but nothing catastrophic. The massive fallen pine looked even more impressive in daylight, its root system taller than me. I approached it cautiously, examining the base. Something wasn't right. The roots hadn't simply torn free from the soil. They'd been pulled, wrenched from the ground with tremendous force. Marking the tree's position on my map, I began a perimeter check, documenting the storm damage for my report. That's when I found the first track. Pressed into the mud near the lake's edge was a footprint unlike anything I'd ever seen. Humanoid in shape, but massive, easily 18 inches long. The impression was deep, suggesting incredible weight. I photographed it with my equipment and made a plaster cast, trying to maintain scientific detachment despite the chill running through my body. This was no bear. No known animal made prints like these. As I worked, a noise reached me from across the lake, a low, rhythmic moaning that seemed to emanate from the very earth. It wasn't wind. It wasn't any animal call I recognized. It was deliberate. Communication. I scanned the opposite shore, binoculars revealing nothing but pristine wilderness. Yet I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched, studied, by something concealed among the trees. The radio crackled inside the cabin. I rushed back, hoping for human contact. Anaktok Basin, this is local guide Askuato. Do you copy, new ranger? Over. I grabbed the receiver. This is Ranger Koyuk. I copy. Over. Welcome to the Forgotten Corner, Ranger. I'm bringing a hunting party through your region 2 days from now. Standard notification. Anything we should know about? Over. I hesitated, looking at the plaster cast drying on the table. Had some storm damage. Large tree down near the cabin. Otherwise all clear. Over. Good to hear. We'll make camp at the north end of the lake. Stop by if you want some company. Most rangers get hungry for conversation after a few weeks up there. Over. Appreciate it. Safe travels. Over and out. I stared at the cast, debating whether to report the footprint to headquarters. They'd want evidence beyond a single track. They'd want explanations. And worst of all, they might decide the area needed scientific investigation, bringing teams of researchers to disturb the delicate balance of this place. Something within me wanted to protect this mystery, even as another part feared what I might be harboring. What had drawn me to this remote outpost? Was it really just the need for solitude, or something deeper? Something calling me to this specific wilderness? As darkness fell again, I found myself once more at the window, watching the tree line as instructed. The clouds had cleared, revealing a moonlit forest that seemed to pulsate with secret life. In the distance, something moved, a tall, dark silhouette gliding between trees with unnatural grace. I doused the cabin lights and continued watching. The figure emerged briefly into a clearing, silhouetted against the moonlit lake, tall, impossibly tall, with broad shoulders and long, powerful limbs. My breath caught as it turned directly toward the cabin. Even from this distance, I felt seen, known, judged. Then it was gone, melting into the forest as if it had never existed. That night, I dreamed of mountains and caves, of ancient beings and forgotten pacts. I woke gasping, sheets soaked with sweat despite the cabin's chill. On the window, clearly visible in the morning light, was a handprint, far larger than any human's, pressed against the glass from outside. I hadn't imagined what I'd seen, and whatever it was, it had come to inspect me while I slept. The handprint vanished when I approached the window, evaporating like morning dew under sunlight. I questioned my sanity briefly before donning my gear for a patrol. The massive footprint by the lake had hardened overnight, preserved perfectly in the mud. I photographed it again, adding a ruler for scale this time. My radio check with headquarters was brief and professional. I mentioned the fallen tree, but said nothing about tracks or handprints. Some instinct told me to keep these findings private, at least until I understood more. Armed with my service rifle and recording equipment, I set out along the eastern shore of Lake Anactoc. The morning was crisp, sunlight dancing across the water's surface. Under different circumstances, I might have found it peaceful. But the weight of what I'd seen, what I continued to feel watching me, transformed the beauty into something ominous. 2 hours into my hike, I discovered a deer carcass. The animal had been torn apart with tremendous force, not consumed like a predator's kill. Its remains were scattered across a small clearing, with no sign of being fed upon. More disturbing were the marks on the trees surrounding the site, deep gouges in the bark at a height of nearly 9 feet. Not bear claws, these were deliberate patterns, almost like warnings. I documented everything, growing increasingly uneasy. This wasn't normal animal behavior. The systematic destruction suggested intelligence, purpose, rage. A twig snapped in the distance. I froze, listening intently as birds fell silent. The forest held its breath. Something was moving through the underbrush, circling my position. I raised my rifle, turning slowly to track the sound. "Hello?" I called, immediately regretting breaking the silence. "National Park Service, identify yourself." The movement stopped. For several excruciating seconds, nothing happened. Then a rhythmic knocking began, wood against wood, from multiple directions. 3 sharp impacts, followed by 2 slow ones. Repeated, coordinated. They were surrounding me. I backed toward the lake, keeping my weapon ready. The knocking followed, maintaining distance but clearly tracking my retreat. When I reached the shoreline, it stopped abruptly, leaving only the gentle lapping of waves against the rocky beach. Across the water, something massive moved through the tree line. Just a glimpse of dark fur and powerful movement before it vanished. I raised my binoculars but saw nothing except disturbed branches slowly settling. The journey back to the cabin was tense, every sense heightened to painful awareness. I felt exposed, vulnerable. The forest I'd admired yesterday now seemed filled with watching eyes and hidden threats. When the cabin finally came into view, relief washed over me, until I noticed the door standing open. I'd locked it, I was certain. Approaching cautiously, rifle ready, I called out again. No response. The interior appeared undisturbed except for one detail. The plaster cast of the footprint had been turned over as if examined. Nothing else was touched. As I secured the door, the radio crackled. "Anactoc Basin, this is local elder Nushka. Request conversation, Ranger. Over." I hesitated before responding. "This is Ranger Koyuk. Go ahead. Over." "Not over radio. In person. Will arrive tomorrow morning. Important you understand the territory you guard. Over." "Understood. I'll be here. Over and out." The transmission ended before I could ask questions. I checked the logs, finding no mention of any elder named Nushka having official business in the park. Unofficial consultations with local indigenous leaders weren't uncommon, but they were typically arranged through headquarters. That night, the forest came alive with sounds. Not the normal nocturnal chorus of insects and hunting predators, but something orchestrated. Wood knocking continued at irregular intervals, sometimes close, sometimes distant. Occasionally, a low vocalization would rise above the other sounds, a moan that transformed into something almost like speech before fading away. I recorded everything, checking and rechecking the cabin's locks. Around midnight, the activity intensified. Heavy footsteps circled the perimeter, stopping occasionally at windows. I kept lights off, moving silently through the cabin with my night vision equipment. Through the green-tinted view, I caught glimpses of massive shapes moving through the darkness. Not one creature, but several. They maintained distance from each other, creating a loose perimeter around the cabin. Sentries. At precisely 3:17 a.m., everything stopped. The sudden silence was more terrifying than the activity had been. I positioned myself at the main window, scanning methodically for movement. What I saw next defies rational explanation. A figure emerged from the tree line, much taller than a man, covered in dark fur, walking upright with unsettling grace. It moved deliberately to the center of the clearing, moonlight revealing a broad, sloped forehead and deep-set eyes that reflected light like a nocturnal animal's. For several minutes it simply stood there, staring at the cabin. Then it raised massive arms and made a series of gestures, deliberate movements that could only be described as sign language. Different from human signing, but undeniably communication. When it finished, it waited, as if expecting a response. When none came, it repeated the sequence more slowly, then a third time. After the third repetition, it turned and disappeared into the forest with astonishing speed for its size. I remained frozen at the window, struggling to process what I'd witnessed. This wasn't just a creature. It was an intelligent being attempting communication. My hands trembled as I noted the encounter in my personal journal, knowing this would never appear in an official report. Dawn approached with agonizing slowness. As light filtered through the trees, I ventured outside, rifle ready. The clearing revealed multiple sets of enormous tracks crossing from various directions, all converging on the spot where the creature had stood. I photographed everything, made more casts, and collected hair samples from bark where they had brushed against trees. Around mid-morning, a small boat approached from the north end of the lake. An elderly native woman sat at the stern, navigating with confident precision. She beached the craft and approached without hesitation. "Ranger Koyuk, I am Nushka." Her weathered face revealed decades of hard living in this unforgiving wilderness, but her eyes remained sharp, evaluating me with unsettling intensity. "You've seen them," she stated flatly. Not a question. I nodded, unable to deny it. "They've been watching you since you arrived, testing you. Last night, they attempted contact." She gestured toward the clearing. "Did you respond?" I didn't know how." She nodded, unsurprised. "Few do. That is why I am here, to teach you their language before it's too late." "Too late for what?" Her expression darkened. "Too late for the lost ones. There are 3 hikers missing in the northern valley. The people of the forest know where they are. They will show you, but only if you demonstrate understanding." I invited her inside, where she examined my casts and photographs without surprise. She traced the patterns I'd documented on the trees. "Warning marks," she confirmed. "Territory boundaries. The deer was a message. They protect what's theirs." "What exactly are they?" I finally asked. She fixed me with a penetrating stare. "The original guardians of this land. They were here long before humans. They remain where the wilderness is deepest, watching, judging. Your government calls this area a national park. To them, it is simply home." "Bigfoot, Sasquatch," I offered, feeling foolish even saying the words. "Those are human names for something humans don't understand. They call themselves the Kushtaka in our language, the forest people. Ancient, intelligent, territorial, and now concerned about the missing hikers in their territory." She spent the afternoon teaching me rudimentary signs, acknowledgement, respect, inquiry. Basic communication with beings I'd been taught couldn't possibly exist. As the sun began its descent, she prepared to leave. "Tonight they will return. Show them you understand. Ask about the hikers." She handed me a small leather pouch. "An offering. Place it where the tall one stood, then wait inside." After she departed, I examined the pouch tobacco, berries, and something that smelled like cedar. I followed her instructions, placing it at the center of the clearing as darkness fell. Back inside, I waited, recording equipment ready. The night passed in tense silence until midnight, when the wood knocking began again. 3 hours later, they appeared, not just one, but 3 massive figures emerging from different points along the tree line. The largest approached the offering, examined it, then looked directly at the cabin. It began signing. With trembling hands, I responded with the simple acknowledgement gesture Nushka had taught me. The creature went still, then signed again, more complex this time, but ending with a motion I recognized: inquiry. I stepped onto the porch, heart pounding, and repeated the inquiry sign, adding the motion for people and lost as best I could remember. The response was immediate. All 3 creatures became animated, exchanging signs among themselves before the largest turned back to me and made a follow motion, then pointed north. They wanted me to come with them. Now. I grabbed my emergency pack, weapon, and communication equipment. Against every protocol and procedure, I stepped into the night, following 3 creatures that science insisted didn't exist, into the darkest part of the wilderness. The search for the missing hikers had begun. They moved with astonishing speed and silence through terrain that had me stumbling and gasping for breath. My headlamp illuminated just enough path to follow, but they seemed to navigate by some other sense, flowing through the forest like water. The smallest of the 3, still over 7 feet tall, occasionally glanced back, slowing when I fell too far behind. We traveled for hours, climbing steadily into the mountains north of the lake. The terrain grew increasingly rugged, forcing me to use climbing equipment at several points. They simply scaled the rocks with powerful arms and feet that seemed designed for this environment. Dawn broke as we reached a high ridge overlooking a vast, mist-filled valley. The largest creature, whom I'd begun thinking of as the leader, gestured for me to stop, then pointed down into the swirling fog. The message was clear. Our destination lay below. I checked my GPS unit. We'd traveled nearly 15 miles from the cabin, into territory rarely visited even by the most experienced park rangers. No wonder the missing hikers hadn't been found. Search teams would have focused on established trails, not this primeval wilderness. The descent into the valley took another hour. As we penetrated the mist, temperature dropped noticeably. The forest changed character, older somehow, with massive trees I couldn't identify, and thick undergrowth that seemed to part before my guides but tangle around my legs. The leader stopped abruptly, raising a hand. A low vocalization rumbled from its chest, not directed at me, but at something ahead. An answering call echoed through the trees, sending chills down my spine. We weren't alone. From the undergrowth emerged another of the creatures, smaller, limping visibly, with a long scar across its face. It regarded me with obvious hostility, barking a series of sounds at the leader. They exchanged signs too rapid for me to follow, gestures becoming increasingly aggressive. I stood perfectly still, aware that I was witnessing some kind of confrontation about my presence. The injured creature clearly objected to bringing a human into their territory. Finally, the leader made a definitive gesture that silenced the argument. The scarred creature retreated, disappearing into the mist with a final threatening glance in my direction. The leader turned to me, pointing ahead before making the sign for danger. We continued more cautiously, the forest growing darker despite the morning hour. The mist thickened, reducing visibility to mere yards. Strange formations began appearing through the fog structures of bent living trees, forming crude but intentional shapes. Territorial markers, perhaps, or something with deeper significance. After another mile, we reached a cluster of massive boulders arranged in a rough circle. At the center lay a sight that stopped me cold. Camping equipment scattered across the ground, 3 backpacks partially emptied, an extinguished fire pit, the missing hikers' camp. I approached cautiously, examining the scene. No signs of struggle, no blood. Personal items remained in the packs, wallets, identification, even a cell phone. Whatever had happened, it hadn't been a surprise attack or robbery. "Hello," I called, voice echoing strangely through the mist. "National Park Service, anyone here?" My guides tensed at the sound, exchanging glances. The leader made an urgent silencing gesture, then pointed deeper into the boulder field. We needed to go further. As we navigated between massive stones, the mist began to take on a yellowish tinge. A sulfurous smell permeated the air, growing stronger with each step. The creature's behavior changed, more hesitant, more alert. Even they feared what lay ahead. The boulders gave way to a sheer rock face. At its base, a dark opening gaped like a wound in the earth, a cave entrance partially concealed by fallen debris. The leader pointed emphatically at the cave, then made the signs for people and inside. The hikers were in there. I activated my radio, hoping for a connection despite the remote location. To my surprise, it crackled to life. "Ranger Control, this is Koyuk. Do you copy? Over." Static hissed, then a broken response. "Koyuk, position, repeat. Located possible position of missing hikers. Approximately 15 miles north-northwest of Anaktok Basin. Cave system and valley below Northern Ridge. Requesting backup and medical support. Over." More static then. "Signal weak. Coordinates. Confirm." I provided GPS coordinates, unable to explain how I'd found this location or who my guides were. "Beginning investigation of cave system. 3 missing persons potentially inside. Will establish communication when possible. Over." The radio died completely after that transmission. I turned to my guides, who watched with evident curiosity at the device. "Help is coming," I told them, unsure if they understood my words. "I need to check inside." I prepared my equipment, headlamp, backup light, first aid kit, water. The leader reached out suddenly, massive hand gently but firmly gripping my arm. It made a series of signs I didn't recognize, except for the final one: danger. "I understand," I nodded, "but I have to go. It's my job." The creature released me, then made a decision. It gestured to the others, and one departed quickly, moving back the way we'd come. The leader and the remaining guide faced the cave entrance, clearly intent on accompanying me. I activated my headlamp and stepped into darkness. The entrance narrowed quickly, forcing us into single file. The creatures had to crouch significantly, their massive frames ill-suited to the confined space. The smaller one took the lead, while the leader followed behind me. The tunnel sloped downward at a gentle angle, the stone smooth beneath our feet. This was no natural formation but a constructed passage. The sulfur smell intensified as we descended. Yellow mineral deposits lined the walls, glittering in my light beam. The tunnel widened suddenly, opening into a large chamber with a ceiling lost in darkness above. My light couldn't penetrate far enough to see the top. The chamber contained structures, crude stone formations that might have been altars or tables. Ancient symbols covered the walls, unlike any petroglyphs I'd documented in my training. This place was old, far older than human presence in the region. A moan echoed from deeper within the cave system. Human. I moved toward the sound, following a smaller passage that branched from the main chamber. My guides became increasingly agitated, making gestures I couldn't interpret, but their anxiety was palpable. They feared whatever lay ahead. The passage opened into another chamber, smaller, but illuminated by a strange, pulsating bioluminescence that clung to the walls. The light revealed 3 figures huddled against the far wall. The missing hikers. They were alive, but clearly traumatized. 2 men and a woman, their clothing torn, faces pale and drawn. When my light hit them, they cowered away, shielding their eyes. "National Park Service," I called, moving slowly toward them. "I'm Ranger Koyuk. I'm here to help you." "Keep them away," one man sobbed, pointing behind me. "Don't let them take us again." I turned to see my guides hanging back at the chamber entrance, unwilling to enter this space. The leader made urgent gestures. We needed to leave, now. "What happened to you?" I asked the hikers, approaching cautiously. "Can you walk?" "We got lost," the woman whispered, voice hoarse. 3 days ago, found the cave during the storm, then they came, brought us deeper, kept us here." "We're not the first," the second man added, revealing a wall covered with tally marks. "Others were here before, so many marks." A low rumble suddenly shook the chamber. Dust and small stones fell from above. My guides became frantic, vocalizing loudly, gesturing for immediate evacuation. "We need to go," I told the hikers, helping them to their feet. "Follow me, right now." "Not the tunnel," the first man cried. "That's where it comes from." "What comes from where?" I demanded. Before anyone could answer, a deafening roar echoed through the chamber. not the vocalizations of my guides, something altogether different, deeper, ancient, hungry. The bioluminescence pulsed rapidly, as if responding to the sound. From a dark opening at the chamber's far side, something moved, something massive, pale, eyeless. It sensed our presence without seeing, turning a grotesque, elongated head in our direction. My guides retreated immediately, pulling me back toward the tunnel. The hikers needed no encouragement, scrambling after us in terror. The thing in the darkness roared again, now surging forward with frightening speed for its size. We fled through the narrow passage, the creature's roars pursuing us. The hikers struggled to keep pace, weakened by days of captivity. I supported the woman, while the leader unexpectedly scooped up one of the men who had collapsed. Despite their evident fear, my guides were helping with the rescue. We burst into the main chamber just as another tremor shook the cave. Larger stones began falling now, the entire system becoming unstable. "Run!" I shouted, pushing everyone toward the exit tunnel. "The whole place is coming down!" We charged through the ascending passage, the sounds of collapse growing behind us. The creature's roars became desperate, then faded as rockfalls separated it from us. Daylight appeared ahead, a small circle of salvation growing larger with each step. We erupted from the cave entrance as a massive cloud of dust billowed out behind us. The ground shook violently, and a large section of the rock face collapsed inward, sealing the entrance completely. Outside, more of the creatures waited, at least a dozen, including the one that had left us earlier. They maintained distance from us, watching silently as we caught our breath. The hikers stared in disbelief at the gathering of beings science insisted didn't exist. "They saved us," the woman whispered. "Why? They were the ones who took us." The leader approached slowly, making deliberate signs. Not to me this time, but to the hikers. It pointed to the now collapsed cave, then to the sky, then made a gesture Nushka had taught me, warning. "They didn't capture you," I realized aloud. "They were protecting you, from whatever was in there." The hiker's expression shifted from fear to confusion. "But they brought us into the cave." "No," I corrected, understanding dawning. "They found you already in the cave's outer chambers. They were keeping you away from the deeper parts, from that thing." As if confirming my interpretation, the leader nodded, slowly, a distinctly human gesture it must have learned from observation. It pointed to the hikers, then to me, then in the direction of the lake and cabin. "They want me to take you back," I translated, "to safety." The radio suddenly crackled, signal restored now that we were outside. "Koyuk, this is Rescue Team Alpha. Do you copy? Over." "This is Koyuk," I responded quickly. "I've located all 3 hikers, alive but requiring medical attention. Cave system has collapsed. We're returning to extraction point. Over." "Understood. Helicopter dispatched to your coordinates. ETA 3 hours. Over." I turned to thank my guides, but they were already retreating into the forest, melting away with that same uncanny silence. Only the leader remained, watching from the tree line. "Thank you," I called to it, adding the gesture for gratitude Nushka had taught me. It raised one massive hand in acknowledgement, then disappeared among the ancient trees. The hikers stared at me in shock. "What were those things?" one finally asked. "The original guardians of this wilderness," I answered, echoing Nushka's words, "and I think they just recruited me to help them." The official report contained significant redactions. The rescue helicopter extracted us from a clearing 2 miles from the cave site, far enough that the flight crew saw nothing unusual. The hikers received medical attention, their condition diagnosed as dehydration and shock. Their story about being held in caves by massive humanoid creatures was attributed to hallucinations from their ordeal. I provided coordinates, confirmed the cave collapse, and offered no explanation for how I'd located them 15 miles from their last known position. When pressed, I claimed to have found tracks and followed ranger training protocols. My superiors accepted this with visible relief. They wanted a success story, not an inexplicable one. 2 days later, I returned to my cabin at Lake Anaktok. The forest felt different now, not a wilderness to be conquered or even protected, but a realm with its own ancient guardians and rules. I was merely a visitor, granted conditional access. Elder Nushka arrived as I was unpacking supplies from the ranger boat. "You have seen," she stated simply. "Now you understand." "Not everything," I admitted. "What was that thing in the cave? The pale creature?" Her expression darkened. "The enemy, the reason they need human allies." She settled on the porch step, gesturing for me to join her. "There are old stories among my people, very old, about a time when the forest people and humans lived separately but acknowledged each other. Then something came, something not of this world. It drove the forest people deeper into wilderness. They've been fighting it ever since." "Fighting what? That thing didn't look natural." "It is not. It comes from beneath and beyond. Many names and many stories. Wendigo, Gogit, the hunger that walks. It infects minds first, then bodies." She tapped her temple. "Makes you see things, want things, then it takes you." "The hikers. We're being prepared. The forest people saved them by keeping them away from its influence. They've done this many times before." "Why don't they just kill it?" She laughed without humor. "You cannot kill what was never truly alive. You can only contain it. For generations they've been guardians, keeping it sealed away. But now, humans penetrate deeper into their territory, unwitting sacrifices walking straight to the enemy. And they recruited me to help? Why me? They choose carefully. Watch for signs. Your predecessor was also chosen, and the one before her. This cabin has been a meeting point for generations." She gestured at the structure. "Built on their terms, in their territory, with their permission." I processed this revelation that the National Park Service had, perhaps unwittingly, maintained a relationship with these beings for decades. "The cave collapsed," I noted. "Is the creature trapped?" "For now. But there are other entrances to its domain. The collapse bought time, nothing more." She fixed me with an intense gaze. "They will come tonight, to teach you more signs, to show you the other entrances. Will you help them, Ranger Koyuk?" I thought about the terror in that cave, about the hikers who would have been consumed by something ancient and malevolent if not for intervention, about a duty that extended beyond my human employers to the land itself. "Yes," I answered. "I'll help them." Nushka nodded approvingly. "Good. There aren't many who would. Fear makes humans violent toward what they don't understand." As promised, they came that night, 5 of them, including the leader I'd followed before. They approached openly, no longer hiding their presence from me. The leader came directly to the porch where I waited, towering over me with an intimidating presence that somehow no longer felt threatening. I made the signs for greeting and respect. It responded in kind, then added signs I didn't recognize. Nushka, sitting quietly nearby, translated. "They thank you for helping save the lost ones. They say you have proven worthy of truth." For hours, they taught me their rudimentary sign language. Through Nushka's translations, I learned about their society, their history, their ongoing war against the creature they called simply the hunger. The hunger had arrived generations ago, burrowing beneath the mountains, creating a complex cave system from which it could emerge to feed. It consumed body and soul, using human minds as vessels to spread its influence. The forest people, whom Nushka called the Kushtaka, had contained it for centuries, but modern human intrusion complicated their efforts. "Why don't they just relocate?" I asked. Nushka's expression grew solemn after the leader responded. "They are bound to this place. The hunger cannot be allowed to escape the valley. If it does, it will spread like a plague through human settlements, growing stronger with each mind it corrupts. Why not tell the Park Service? We could close the area, fence it off." More signs from the leader, increasingly agitated. "They tried," Nushka translated, 3 times in the past century. Each time humans came with weapons, with machines. They did not listen, did not understand. Many died, both humans and forest people. The implications were staggering. A shadow war had been raging in this wilderness, invisible to human society, with these creatures as the only barrier between humanity and something truly monstrous. Before departing, the leader gave me a final message. Nushka's voice grew grave as she translated. "The hunger grows stronger. The cave collapse angered it. It will try another path soon. They need you to prevent humans from entering the North Valley until the season of snow. Can you do this?" I nodded, understanding the gravity of my new responsibility. "I'll find a way. They melted into the night, leaving me with knowledge few humans possessed, and a burden I'd never anticipated when accepting this post. The next morning, I contacted headquarters with an urgent recommendation: close the North Valley trails due to unstable geological conditions. I fabricated a convincing report about fissures and potential landslides, knowing that a summer closure would face resistance. When my supervisor questioned the recommendation, I played my final card. The safety of the recently rescued hikers had been compromised by exactly these conditions. The cave collapse that nearly killed them might have been just the beginning. The closure was approved. Signs would be posted, maps updated. The North Valley would be off limits until winter, when snowfall would naturally prevent access. For 2 weeks I patrolled the boundaries, turning away the few determined hikers who tried to circumvent the closure. The forest people appeared occasionally, watching from distance, ensuring I maintained my end of our unspoken agreement. Then came the night that changed everything. A series of earthquakes, minor tremors barely registering on seismic equipment, shook the region. To casual observers, it was nothing alarming. To me, it signaled something trying to break free. The forest people appeared at dusk, more agitated than I'd ever seen them. Their signs were urgent, demanding I follow immediately. I grabbed my emergency gear and joined them without question. We traveled through the night, covering difficult terrain with remarkable speed. By dawn, we'd reached a different section of the North Valley, a rocky area dominated by a sheer cliff face. At its base, a narrow fissure leaked yellowish mist into the morning air. The leader pointed at the fissure, then made the sign for hunger, followed by escape. The creature was breaking through a new exit. I activated my emergency radio, calling for immediate support. Geological emergency in North Valley Section C7. Toxic gas venting from new fissure. Request immediate specialized containment team. Potential hazard to regional water table. It wasn't entirely a lie. The yellowish mist certainly appeared toxic, but I knew no containment team could handle what was really trying to emerge. As we waited for the response team, the forest people worked frantically, dragging massive stones and fallen trees to the fissure, attempting to seal it. The ground trembled continuously underfoot, the fissure widening despite their efforts. A roar erupted from deep within the earth, the same horrific sound I'd heard in the cave. The forest people responded with their own vocalizations, a chorus of defiance against the ancient enemy. 4 hours later, helicopters appeared overhead. The forest people retreated instantly, vanishing into the tree line. I remained, directing the hazmat team to the fissure, maintaining my story about toxic geological emissions. They deployed containment measures, concrete, expanding foam, sensor equipment. I watched with silent hope, knowing these human efforts might temporarily reinforce what the forest people had begun. As the team worked, I noticed movement at the tree line. Not the forest people this time, but a human figure, Elder Nushka, observing from distance. When our eyes met, she nodded once, then retreated into the forest. By nightfall, the fissure was sealed with 20 tons of quick-setting concrete and a monitoring station established nearby. The team departed, leaving me to maintain observation overnight. In the darkness, the forest people returned, examining the human handiwork with evident curiosity. The leader approached, gesturing toward the now sealed fissure, then to me, then made the sign for gratitude. I nodded acknowledgement, then asked the question that had been haunting me. Will it hold? The leader's response needed no translation. A gesture of uncertainty, followed by the sign for watching and waiting. We had won a battle, not the war. As dawn approached, I realized my role had fundamentally changed. I was no longer just a park ranger, but a sentinel standing between humanity and something ancient and malevolent. A bridge between two species united against a common enemy. The forest people departed with the morning light, but I knew they remained nearby, watching, waiting, as they had for generations. I returned to my cabin to file reports filled with geological terminology and environmental concerns, protecting a truth the world wasn't ready to accept. That night, a final visitor arrived, Elder Nushka, bearing a small wooden box. "For you," she said, placing it on the table. "From them." Inside lay a necklace of intricately carved stone beads, each bearing symbols matching those I'd seen in the cave. A mark of their trust, she explained. Wear it when you enter their territory, and they will know you as ally. How long have you been their messenger? I asked. Since I was a girl, my grandmother before me and hers before that. She smiled faintly. The burden passes through generations. Now it includes you. As she left, she paused at the door. Your name, Koyuk, man of the wilderness. Did you choose it by chance? It just felt right when I came here. She nodded, unsurprised. Names have power. They saw that power in you before you even arrived. Nothing here happens by chance, Ranger Koyuk. Remember that? I stood at the window long after she departed, watching the tree line as dusk settled over the wilderness. Movement caught my eye, massive shadows flowing between ancient trunks with graceful precision. The guardians continued their vigil as they had for centuries, and now, so would I. 6 months passed. Winter transformed the landscape into a frozen stillness that made patrols difficult, but sealed the North Valley beneath impenetrable snow. The concrete barrier held, its monitoring equipment showing no further seismic activity. The forest people appeared less frequently, their massive forms occasionally visible through snow-laden branches. They maintained distance, but acknowledged my presence with subtle gestures when our paths crossed. My reports to headquarters remained factual but vague, documenting weather conditions, wildlife sightings, and maintenance issues. My request to extend my assignment for another year was approved without question. Experienced rangers, willing to endure the isolation, were rare. Elder Nushka visited monthly, bringing supplies and news from the outside world. Through her, I learned more about the history of this arrangement, how generations of her people had served as intermediaries between the forest guardians and the human authorities, who unknowingly shared their mission. The first European to encounter them was a Russian fur trapper in 1887, she explained during one visit. He fled in terror, but returned with others. Many died before understanding was reached. How did your people first come to work with them? I asked. Long before recorded history, our oldest stories tell of the great hunger that came from the sky and how the tall ones helped contain it. She gestured toward the mountains. The valley was not always a valley. Once it was flat land. The tall ones and our ancient shamans sacrificed much to create the containment. I absorbed this, imagining a cataclysm powerful enough to reshape the landscape, part natural disaster, part deliberate action. When spring arrived, melting snow revealed new fissures surrounding the concrete barrier. The monitoring equipment remained silent, but yellowed vegetation circled the site like a disease spreading outward. I documented everything, sending samples to headquarters for analysis. The results came back inconclusive, abnormal, but attributable to unique mineral composition in the soil. The forest people grew more active as the weather warmed. They patrolled in groups, reinforcing the barrier with their own methods, structures of interwoven living saplings grown at impossible speeds through some process I couldn't comprehend. In late May, the first hikers of the season arrived in the southern part of my territory. I welcomed them with standard safety briefings, carefully steering them away from the North Valley without arousing suspicion. One night, as I reviewed patrol maps, the radio crackled unexpectedly. Anaktok Basin. This is Dr. Leah Mikva, Geological Survey, requesting permission to access North Valley Restricted Zone tomorrow. Authorization code Sierra 934. Over. I froze. No geological survey had been scheduled. This is Ranger Koyuk. May I ask the purpose of your survey? Over. Routine follow-up to last year's seismic anomalies. 3-person team, 1 day on site. Over. I considered my options carefully. Denying access would raise questions. Allowing it might expose secrets better kept hidden. Understood. Please report to Anaktok Basin Cabin at 0800 hours for escort. Safety protocols in effect. Over. Copy that. See you at 0800. Over and out. I immediately hiked to the meeting place where the forest people occasionally left signs for me. A lightning-struck tree halfway to the North Valley. There I left my own message, rocks arranged in the pattern they'd taught me for danger and strangers. By morning, I'd made my decision. I would escort the team, control what they saw, and protect both their safety and the greater secret. If necessary, I would reveal limited information to Dr. Mikva, enough to establish the importance of containment without exposing the full truth. The geological team arrived precisely at 0800. Dr. Mikva, a thin woman with intelligent eyes, accompanied by two younger assistants laden with equipment. Their credentials appeared legitimate, but something felt wrong. Their interest seemed too focused, too specific. "We've identified unusual magnetic anomalies around the concrete installation," Dr. Mikva explained as we hiked, completely unexpected for this geological formation. "The whole area is unusual," I replied carefully. "That's why we maintain the closure." She studied me with sudden intensity. "Ranger Koyuk, how long have you been stationed here?" "Almost a year." "And you've noticed nothing unusual beyond the geological features?" I maintained a neutral expression. "Define unusual, Doctor." Before she could respond, movement caught my eye. A shadow where no shadow should be, watching from dense undergrowth. We were being followed. I redirected the conversation, pointing out legitimate geological features as we approached the containment site. The closer we came to the concrete barrier, the more I noticed small signs of the forest people's presence. Broken branches at improbable heights, footprints quickly covered but still visible to a trained eye. Dr. Mikva noticed too. Her gaze lingered on these anomalies, but she made no comment. The containment site appeared unchanged, concrete barrier intact, monitoring equipment quietly humming. The team set up additional sensors, taking soil and air samples, working with methodical precision. As they worked, I noticed one assistant repeatedly wandering toward the tree line, camera in hand, seemingly documenting the vegetation, but angling his lens toward the deeper forest. "Please stay within the designated area," I called firmly. "The terrain can be unstable." He nodded, but seemed disappointed. Not the reaction of a geologist, but of a hunter whose prey remained elusive. By mid-afternoon, dark clouds gathered overhead. The team worked faster, Dr. Mikva frequently checking her watch. "We need another hour," she told me. "The readings are significant." "The weather's turning," I countered. "We should head back." "Just 30 more minutes," she insisted. "This data could be crucial." I reluctantly agreed, watching the forest grow darker as clouds thickened. The wind carried an unusual scent, not the coming rain, but something sour and ancient. As the team packed their equipment, the assistant with the camera suddenly froze, staring into the forest. "Did you see that?" he whispered. "See what?" I asked, already knowing the answer. "Something big, moving between the trees." Dr. Mikva approached quickly. "Where exactly?" Her interest confirmed my suspicions. This was never about geology. "Probably a moose," I said firmly. "They're common in this area, and dangerous when startled. We need to leave. Now." As if emphasizing my point, a low rumble of thunder rolled across the valley. The team reluctantly followed me back toward the trail, the assistant repeatedly glancing over his shoulder. We'd covered less than a mile when the storm hit, not with rain, but with a thick, unnatural fog that rolled down from the mountains with impossible speed. Within minutes, visibility dropped to mere feet. "Stay close," I ordered, concern mounting. This was no natural weather pattern. A wood-knocking sound echoed through the fog, 3 sharp impacts, followed by 2 slow ones. The forest people's signal for danger. Not a warning to me this time, but about the researchers. "What's that noise?" the second assistant asked nervously. "Woodpecker," I lied. "Common in these parts." Dr. Mikva's expression told me she knew better. "That's no bird, Ranger." Before I could respond, the ground trembled beneath our feet. Not a major earthquake, but a deliberate vibration, like something massive moving underground. The concrete barrier. Something was testing it. "Run," I ordered, abandoning pretense. "Back to the trail, now." We fled through the fog, the rumbling growing louder behind us. Through the mist, massive shadows moved parallel to our course, the forest people escorting us out, protecting us even as they maintained their distance. The assistant with the camera spotted them. "There!" he shouted, raising his equipment. "I knew it!" Before he could capture any images, a massive hand emerged from the fog, swatting the camera to the ground where it shattered. The assistant screamed, stumbling backward into Dr. Mikva. I made the emergency sign for friend and peace, stepping between my charges and the now visible forest guardian. It paused, recognizing me, then retreated just enough to remain partially concealed by fog. "What is that thing?" the assistant gasped. "Your escort out," I replied grimly. "Follow me and don't look back." The journey to the cabin was tense, fog following us the entire way, the forest people maintaining an invisible perimeter around our group. When we finally reached the relative safety of the clearing, Dr. Mikva pulled me aside. "You know what they are," she stated flatly. "That's why you're here." I studied her carefully. "Why are you here, doctor?" "The truth." She hesitated, then reached into her pocket, producing not identification, but a worn photograph. A group of researchers standing before a cave entrance. Among them was a younger version of herself, and beside her, "My brother," she explained, voice tight with emotion. "He disappeared in these mountains 20 years ago. The official report said he fell, that his body was never recovered." She pointed to the photo. "But this was emailed to me 3 weeks ago from an anonymous source. Look at the date stamp." The photo had been taken 1 week before our conversation. "He's alive, Ranger, somehow, and I need to find him." The pieces fell into place. Dr. Mikva wasn't hunting the forest people out of scientific curiosity, but searching for a lost brother who had somehow survived for decades in this wilderness. "Doctor," I began carefully, "if your brother is here, he may not be human anymore," she finished. "I've spent 20 years researching the legends, the transformations, people taken into the forest who become something else." She knew more than I'd expected, perhaps enough to understand the greater threat. "The containment site," I said slowly. "It's not just a geological anomaly." "I know. Whatever's down there, it's what my brother was researching when he disappeared." She met my gaze directly. He was looking for something ancient, something that doesn't belong in our world. The fog had begun to dissipate, revealing a silent circle of forest people surrounding the cabin clearing. They made no move to approach, but their message was clear. They were listening, evaluating. Dr. Mikva saw them too, but showed no fear. "They protect it, contain it." "Yes?" I nodded slowly. "They've been doing it for generations, and they recruit help when they need it." "Like you." "Like me," I confirmed, "and possibly like your brother." Hope flickered across her face. "Then he's with them?" "I don't know. But if he's been here all this time, they would know." I gestured toward the watching guardians. "They remember everything." The leader stepped forward, massive form fully revealed in the clearing light. It studied Dr. Mikva with evident recognition, then made a series of signs. Complex, detailed communication intended for her specifically. To my astonishment, she responded with her own signs, not the rudimentary gestures I'd learned, but fluid, practiced movements. "You speak their language," I realized. "My brother taught me the basics from his early research. I've been practicing since I found the photo." Her hands moved again, forming questions I couldn't follow. The leader responded, then pointed north, not toward the containment site, but toward a different part of the mountains entirely. Dr. Mikva's eyes filled with tears. "He's alive, changed but alive." She turned to me. "Will you help me find him?" I looked at the forest people, receiving a subtle nod from the leader. "On one condition. Your research, your equipment, everything you've gathered about this area, it can't leave here. The world isn't ready for this knowledge." She nodded without hesitation. "Some secrets need keeping, Ranger, especially from those who would exploit them." Her assistants, huddled nervously by the cabin, didn't share her comfort. "Dr. Mikva, we need to report this," one called. The university will hear exactly what I decide they should hear," she cut him off sharply. "Inconclusive geological readings requiring further study, nothing more." I respected her decision but remained wary. "And your assistants?" "Will comply," she stated with authority that brooked no argument, "or will find their academic careers surprisingly short." The forest people retreated as night approached, melting back into the wilderness that was their domain. Only the leader remained, watching from the tree line. That night, as Dr. Mikva prepared for a journey to find her transformed brother, Elder Nushka arrived unexpectedly. She showed no surprise at finding the research team, merely nodding to Dr. Mikva as if they were old acquaintances. "The hunger grows stronger," she announced, without preamble. "The concrete fails. We must renew the old ways." "What old ways?" I asked. "The binding, the covenant between peoples." She gestured to include Dr. Mikva. "The bloodlines reunite for purpose." Understanding dawned slowly. "Your brother wasn't taken," I told Dr. Mikva. "He joined them willingly, to help maintain the containment." "A watcher," Nushka confirmed. "As you have become, as she must now decide to be." Dr. Mikva looked between us, then toward the dark forest where the leader still observed. "Will I see him? Speak with him?" "Yes," Nushka replied. "But not as the brother you remember. The transition changes more than form." "I've spent 20 years searching for answers," Dr. Mikva said firmly. "I'm not leaving without them." The night passed in preparation, not just for Dr. Mikva's journey, but for what Nushka called the renewal. The concrete barrier had always been temporary, a modern solution to an ancient problem. The true containment required something deeper, a covenant between the forest people and humans willing to share their burden. As dawn approached, I stood on the cabin porch with Dr. Mikva. Her assistants would return to civilization with carefully curated data and sworn statements of confidentiality. She would continue into the wilderness with me and Nushka, seeking her brother, and a truth few humans ever encountered. "Are you certain?" I asked her. "Once you see everything, there's no going back." She nodded, watching the first light touch the distant mountains. "Some questions demand answers, whatever the cost." "And after? When you found your brother?" She turned to me, expression resolute. "Then I'll do what's necessary. What he did, what you've done." She touched the stone necklace I wore, the symbol of my covenant with the forest guardians. "Some burdens are meant to be shared." The leader emerged from the tree line as the sun rose fully, approaching with the fluid grace that had once terrified me but now seemed merely part of the natural order. It made the sign for journey and beginning. Dr. Mikva responded with the sign for ready and truth. I made the sign for protection and alliance. Together, we walked into the ancient forest, toward a reunion decades in the making, and a renewal of bonds far older than human memory. Behind us, the cabin stood as it had for generations, a human outpost in territory that had never truly belonged to humanity alone. The wilderness had its own guardians, and now it had one more. I always tell people I chose to become a park ranger in Alaska because I loved the wilderness. That's partly true, but there's more to it. There always is. My grandmother named me Denali, after the mountain. "Great one," she'd say. "You belong to those ancient places." She was Athabascan, and though my father was not, I carried her stories in my blood. The job offer came during a particularly dark winter in Seattle. My life had collapsed, relationship ended, apartment lost, career stalled. When the posting appeared, experienced wilderness guide sought, remote ranger station Kenai Peninsula, it felt like the land itself was calling me home. The helicopter dropped me at Black Pine Lake in early April. Spring doesn't truly reach this part of Alaska until May, and a healthy layer of snow still blanketed the surrounding forest. The cabin stood alone on the eastern shore, weathered logs silvered by decades of harsh winters. Inside was sparse but functional. Wood stove, desk, ham radio supplies. Solar panels and a small generator provided minimal electricity. My nearest colleague was Station 17, 43 miles northeast. My jurisdiction covered nearly 80 square miles of protected wilderness. Radio check-in twice daily. Supervisor Morrison had instructed during orientation. Morning and evening. Missing 2 consecutive check-ins triggers emergency protocol. That first night I stood on the front porch watching northern lights dance across the sky, feeling truly at peace for the first time in years. The silence was absolute. No cars, no people, no city hum. Just the occasional crack of lake ice and wind through pines. 3 days later, everything changed. I was marking trails about 2 miles from the cabin when I found the first footprint. Initially, I thought a moose had left the depression in the mud, but no moose walks on two legs. The print was massive, nearly twice the size of my boot, with 5 distinct toe impressions. I photographed it with my digital camera, placing my knife beside it for scale. As I crouched there, the forest fell silent. No birds, no insects, just dead air. The hair on my neck prickled. Something was watching me. I scanned the tree line slowly, hand drifting to my sidearm. Nothing moved. Yet the sensation of being observed intensified. "Hello?" My voice sounded thin, swallowed by the vastness. No response, but a branch snapped somewhere behind me, perhaps quarter-mile distant. Too deliberate to be wind. I hurried back to the cabin, radioing Station 17. "Any large wildlife activity reported in Quadrant 6? I asked. "Negative, Denali. Standard bear and moose movements only. Why?" I almost told him about the footprint. Instead, I said, "Just being cautious, still getting oriented to the territory." That night, I dreamed of eyes watching from the forest edge. Not animal eyes, but not quite human either. I woke drenched in sweat despite the cabin's chill. The next morning brought the season's first search and rescue. 2 hikers failed to return to their campsite near Eagle Point. I gathered my emergency pack and headed out at dawn. Spring is particularly dangerous. Unstable ice, sudden weather shifts, hypothermia risks. I found them huddled in a makeshift shelter, 12 miles from their departure point. The woman had twisted her ankle. They'd wisely stopped rather than risk further injury. "Something followed us," the man whispered as I applied a compression wrap to his companion's ankle. "All night, circling our shelter." "Probably a black bear," I replied. "They're curious but generally avoid humans." He shook his head. "Bears breathe. This thing whistled." "Whistled?" "Like wind through teeth. And it was big. We saw the shadow pass between us and the moon." I helped them back to their vehicle at the trailhead. Standard procedure was to document all wildlife encounters. Under species, I hesitated before writing unknown, possible Ursus americanus. But I knew black bears don't whistle. That evening, I found massive scratch marks on the cabin's back wall. 5 parallel lines gouged deep into the wood, nearly 8 feet up. Too high for a bear on all fours, too purposeful for incidental damage. I photographed these too, then reinforced the cabin's door with a chair. I checked my satellite phone. No signal. The radio crackled with static when I tried to reach Station 17. Spring storms often disrupted communications. I'd have to wait until morning. Sleep came reluctantly. Each creak of the cabin's frame jolted me awake. Around 3 a.m., something heavy moved across the porch. The floorboards groaned under substantial weight. I lay frozen in bed, pistol clutched beneath my pillow. Then came the sound, exactly as the hiker described. A whistling, like breath forced through clenched teeth, but deeper, resonating. The door handle turned slowly, testing the lock. I reached for the flashlight, but decided against it. Whatever stood outside, I didn't want to see it. Not yet. The handle jiggled again, more forcefully. Then silence. Minutes stretched interminably before heavy footsteps withdrew. I didn't sleep again that night. Dawn brought no comfort. A dense fog hugged the lake, reducing visibility to mere yards. I stepped carefully onto the porch, scanning for evidence of my night visitor. The wooden planks revealed nothing at first glance, but closer inspection showed subtle indentations, compression patterns from significant weight. At the bottom step, half obscured in mud, was another footprint matching the first. I placed my boot beside it. The print dwarfed mine in both length and width. What disturbed me most were the toes, distinctly human in arrangement but massively disproportionate. I retrieved my camera and paused. Part of me didn't want documentation. Records meant reports, reports meant questions, questions meant scrutiny. I'd sought this position partly to escape scrutiny, to disappear into wilderness. Yet Ranger protocol demanded thorough incident documentation. I photographed everything, then radioed Station 17. "Graham, come in." "Over." Static answered me. The storm system must have knocked out communications temporarily. I'd try again later. My jurisdiction required daily patrols of key areas. Today's route took me along the Northwest Trail, a rugged path skirting Black Pine Lake, before climbing toward Eagle Ridge. The fog thinned as I hiked, but never fully dissipated. Tendrils of mist twisted between trees like searching fingers. 3 miles in, I found the tree. An ancient spruce, at least 6 feet in diameter, had been broken. Not cut, not blown down, broken halfway up its trunk. The splintered wood looked fresh, sap still oozing. No wind event could snap a healthy trunk this size. No standard wildlife possessed the strength. Around the tree's base, the underbrush was flattened in a circular pattern, as if something massive had thrashed about. Pine needles, soil, and vegetation had been raked into small piles. I'd seen bears create ground nests, but never anything this elaborate or purposeful. I crouched to examine the debris piles and noticed something white mixed among the vegetation. Bones. Small, delicate bones, rabbit, squirrel, marmot, hundreds of them, meticulously sorted by size. Cold dread pooled in my stomach. This wasn't random animal behavior. This displayed intent, ritualistic arrangement, intelligence. A branch snapped behind me, close, perhaps 50 yards through the fog. I pivoted, drawing my sidearm. "Park Service, identify yourself." My voice echoed unanswered. Another crack, closer now. I glimpsed movement, a massive shadow gliding between trees. Hunched but bipedal. 7, maybe 8 feet tall. "Stop right there," I shouted, aiming my weapon toward the movement. The shadow paused. For a moment, nothing moved. Then it released that whistling sound. Not communication, I realized with horror, but mimicry. It was imitating human whistling, a sound it must have heard from hikers or rangers. I fired a warning shot into the air. The report cracked through the forest, momentarily burning away the fog with its muzzle flash. In that instant of clarity, I saw it. A towering figure covered in dark fur, impossibly broad shoulders, arms hanging below its knees. Its face remained shadowed, but I caught the reflection of eyes watching me with unmistakable intelligence. Then it was gone, moving with shocking speed for something so large. The fog swallowed its retreat, branches cracking in its wake until silence returned. I half ran, half stumbled back toward the cabin, mind racing. The legends existed across cultures. Sasquatch, Bigfoot, Kushtaka, in Tlingit stories. My grandmother spoke of them rarely, and only in whispers. The ones who watch from trees. Just stories, I'd always thought. Just stories to keep children from wandering too far. But I'd seen it now. Undeniably real. Back at the cabin, I tried the radio again. This time, through heavy static, I caught fragments of response. "Repeat your situation. Cannot clearly. Weather system. Check in tomorrow." The transmission died completely. I was utterly alone with whatever stalked the forest. That night, I double-checked every window, every door. I positioned emergency flares near my bed and kept my sidearm within reach. Outside, rain began to fall, drumming against the roof. I reviewed my photos, confirming what I'd seen wasn't imagination. The footprints were real. The broken tree was real. I considered my options. Protocol dictated staying at my post unless directly threatened. Abandoning the station without authorization could cost me the job. But what constituted direct threat? Was being stalked by an unidentified bipedal creature sufficient justification? Around midnight, the rain intensified. Wind howled around the cabin's corners, rattling the windows. Between thunderclaps, I heard it again, that distinctive whistling. Not from the porch this time, but circling the cabin's perimeter. Testing. Probing. I cut the cabin's lights and peered through window slats. Lightning illuminated the yard in strobing flashes. For an instant I saw it clearly. Massive shoulders hunched against rain, matted fur slick with water, circling my cabin with deliberate, patient strides. It paused at the woodpile, lifted my axe with disturbing ease, and examined it before carefully replacing it. It understood tools. The realization hit me like ice water. This wasn't merely an animal. Whatever lurked outside possessed reasoning, curiosity, intention. It was studying me as thoroughly as I was studying it. Another lightning flash revealed it standing directly before my window, face inches from the glass. I stifled a scream. Its features were disturbingly human-like. Deep-set eyes beneath a heavy brow ridge, a flattened nose, pronounced jaw. But scaled wrong, proportions exaggerated like a cruel caricature of humanity. Our eyes met. Recognition passed between us, predator assessing predator. It pressed one massive hand against the glass, fingers splayed. The window creaked under pressure, but held. I raised my gun, hands trembling. It tilted its head, seemingly curious about the weapon. Did it understand firearms? The implications terrified me. We remained locked in this standoff for several heartbeats before it withdrew into darkness. I didn't sleep that night. I couldn't. Dawn couldn't come fast enough. The storm intensified overnight, evolving into what locals call a widowmaker, violent, unpredictable weather systems that trap and kill the unprepared. Wind bent trees at impossible angles. Rain turned to sleet, turned to snow as temperatures plummeted. The lake, partially thawed days before, refroze under fresh powder. Nature's mood swings could be lethal in Alaska. Communications remained down. My satellite phone showed no service, towers likely damaged by the storm. The radio produced only static. According to protocol, after missing 2 check-ins, Station 17 would dispatch a wellness check. Under these conditions, that might take days. By morning, I'd made my decision. I couldn't stay. Whatever watched the cabin was growing bolder, more curious. Its strength, evidenced by the broken tree, could easily breach the cabin walls. I needed to reach the emergency shelter at Thunder Point, 15 miles southeast. It had a hardened radio system and steel-reinforced walls. I packed efficiently: emergency supplies, extra ammunition, first aid, fire starters, GPS unit, enough provisions for 3 days. I left a detailed note at the cabin explaining my departure and documenting the encounters. The journey would be brutal, given the weather, but less dangerous than remaining isolated with that thing stalking me. At least, that's what I told myself. I departed at first light, though light proved generous. Dark storm clouds transformed day into perpetual twilight. The temperature hovered around 20 degrees Fahrenheit, wind chill pushing it below zero. Snow fell steadily, already 6 inches deep and accumulating. The first 5 miles passed without incident. I followed established trails, moving quickly but carefully. The forest remained eerily silent, wildlife having sought shelter from the storm. Only wind spoke, howling between trunks and rattling bare branches. At mile 6, crossing Blackwater Creek, I noticed the tracks. My blood turned cold, despite my exertion. The same massive footprints I'd documented earlier, but fresh, pressed into new snow, paralleling my own path along the opposite creek bank. It was following me. I quickened my pace, pushing through deepening snow. Thunder Point lay 9 miles ahead, perhaps 4 hours under these conditions. The creature's tracks remained consistent, always opposite mine, never crossing the creek, but never falling behind either. At mile 8, the creek bent sharply east while my trail continued south. The tracks disappeared with the creek, giving momentary relief. Perhaps it was territorial, unwilling to leave its established range. The reprieve lasted barely an hour. I was navigating a steep ravine when I heard it. That distinctive whistling, carried on the wind. Not alongside me now, but ahead. It had circled in front, anticipating my route. Intelligence and knowledge of the terrain, a deadly combination. I halted, considering options. Continuing forward meant potential confrontation. Retreating meant returning to an unsecured cabin where it knew to find me. Neither choice promised safety. The ravine narrowed ahead between rocky outcroppings, a natural bottleneck. Tactical disadvantage. I scanned for alternate routes but found none feasible in these conditions. The creature had chosen its ambush point well. I drew my sidearm and proceeded with excruciating slowness, every sense heightened. Snow continued falling, limiting visibility to perhaps 50 yards. Wind masked subtle sounds, creating constant false alarms as branches cracked under accumulated snow weight. The whistling stopped. Somehow its absence proved more unnerving than its presence. The ravine narrowed to its tightest point, barely 20 feet between rock walls. Snow had drifted here, reaching mid-thigh, making movement laborious. I was halfway through when I spotted it. Not moving this time. Standing perfectly still atop the southern outcropping, partially obscured by falling snow, watching my struggling progress. Even at 30 yards distance, its sheer size impressed upon me a primal fear. Standing upright, it easily reached 8 feet tall. Broad shoulders and barrel chest suggested immense strength. Dark fur, nearly black, provided perfect camouflage against the pine forest behind it. I raised my weapon, though shooting uphill through snow squalls promised poor accuracy. "Stay back!" I shouted, voice nearly lost in the wind. It made no aggressive movement, simply observing my predicament with unsettling focus. Then, deliberately, it lifted something from beside its feet. My heart practically stopped. It held a hiking boot. Not mine, larger, male-sized. The boot looked relatively new but abandoned for some time. It turned the boot over in massive hands, examining it, then looked directly at me as if drawing connection between the footwear and my presence. A message. A warning, perhaps. Then it was moving, descending the outcropping with surprising grace for its bulk. Not directly toward me, but parallel, maintaining distance while clearly demonstrating its mobility advantage in this terrain. I pushed forward desperately, fighting through snowdrifts, maintaining constant visual contact with the creature. It paced me easily, never approaching closer than 20 yards, but never falling behind. The ravine finally widened, offering multiple route options. I chose the densest tree coverage, hoping to use the forest to my advantage. The creature followed, still parallel, still watching. This continued for over an hour, this bizarre escort through wilderness. It never approached, never threatened directly, yet never abandoned the pursuit. Occasionally, it would take routes requiring strength and agility impossible for humans, scaling near vertical rock faces, leaping across gaps between trees, demonstrating its supreme adaptation to this environment. 6 miles from Thunder Point, the weather worsened dramatically. Visibility dropped to mere feet as snow transitioned to whiteout conditions. Wind chill plummeted below dangerous thresholds. I could no longer maintain visual contact with the creature, though occasional whistling confirmed its continued presence. I needed shelter immediately, or risked hypothermia. The emergency maps indicated a small natural cave system nearby, Hunter's Hollow, used occasionally by stranded hikers. I diverted course, fighting through near-blinding conditions. The cave mouth appeared suddenly, a dark gash in white landscape. I stumbled inside, collapsing against cold stone, shivering uncontrollably. The interior extended perhaps 30 feet, offering protection from wind, but little warmth. I needed fire quickly. My hands shook violently as I gathered what meager dry materials I could find. The storm had left little untouched by moisture. I emptied emergency fire starters onto the pile, hands fumbling with matches. The third match caught, flame spreading tentatively through kindling. I huddled close, willing warmth into numb extremities. Outside, the storm raged with increasing fury. As feeling returned painfully to my fingers, awareness of vulnerability crashed over me. The cave had one entrance. I was effectively cornered. The whistling came again, from just outside the cave mouth. I grabbed my weapon, aiming toward the entrance. Snow swirled through the opening, nearly obscuring view of the outside world. Then a massive shadow blocked what little light remained. It stood there, framed perfectly in the cave entrance, snow accumulating on broad shoulders, observing me with that same unnerving intelligence. Neither predatory aggression nor fear showed in its posture, only intense curiosity. We remained frozen thus, locked in mutual observation. Minutes passed. My arm ached holding the weapon steady, but I dared not lower it. Then, with deliberate slowness, it placed something on the ground just inside the cave entrance. It straightened, regarded me one final time, then disappeared into the storm. Long minutes passed before I dared investigate. What I found stole my breath entirely. A freshly killed rabbit, and beside it, arranged with obvious intent, a small pile of dry twigs and bark. Perfect kindling for my struggling fire. I stared at the offerings, mind struggling to process their implications. A dead rabbit, practical protein, dry kindling, essential survival material in these conditions. Deliberate assistance from a creature I'd been taught to fear. The storm raged through the night, temperatures dropping dangerously low. Without the additional kindling, my fire would have died. Without the rabbit meat, hunger would have weakened me further. The creature, whatever it was, had quite possibly saved my life. Why? I huddled near the fire, weapon close but no longer clutched desperately. Outside, occasionally, came that distinctive whistling, distant now, but present. Keeping watch, standing guard. The uncertainty was maddening. By morning the storm had passed. Sunshine sparkled blindingly across fresh snow, at least 2 feet deep in places. The temperature remained brutally cold but climbing. I packed my gear with stiff fingers, preparing to complete the journey to Thunder Point. The cave entrance showed massive footprints, coming and going multiple times during the night. It had returned repeatedly, perhaps checking on me without entering. The implications sent my mind reeling. Stepping into harsh sunlight, I immediately spotted more tracks leading away from the cave. Not toward Thunder Point, but back toward my cabin. A clear invitation. Follow if you choose. Protocol dictated continuing to the emergency shelter. Logic demanded it. Yet something deeper pulled me toward those tracks. Understanding. The need to know. I hesitated only briefly before following the trail back toward my cabin. The journey proved surprisingly manageable. The tracks avoided the deepest drifts, taking advantage of natural windbreaks where snow accumulated less. It knew this terrain intimately, choosing optimal routes invisible to casual observation. I made better time following its path than I would have on established trails. Approaching my cabin clearing by mid-afternoon, I slowed, caution returning. The tracks led directly to my front door, then circled the structure repeatedly before disappearing into the tree line east of the lake. The cabin appeared undisturbed. Inside, everything remained exactly as I'd left it, including my departure note. Nothing taken, nothing disturbed. What had it wanted here? I rebuilt the cabin fire and attempted radio contact. To my surprise, communications had been restored. Station 17, this is Black Pine Lake. Do you copy? Black Pine Lake, we read you. Where have you been? 2 missed check-ins triggered protocol. I fabricated a partial truth. Storm damaged communications. I attempted to reach Thunder Point shelter, but weather forced retreat. Search team was dispatched this morning. Should reach you by nightfall. Tell them to exercise extreme caution, I replied, then hesitated. What could I possibly report about what I'd witnessed? Who would believe me? Any situation we should be aware of? Station 17 pressed. Possible wildlife activity, unusual tracks, nothing confirmed. After signing off, I sat heavily in my chair, contemplating my next actions. Standard procedure required detailed incident reports. Photographic evidence existed on my camera. Yet something held me back from full disclosure. The search team arrived at dusk, 2 experienced rangers named Roscoe and Imala. They brought supplies, communications equipment, and obvious relief at finding me alive. Nasty storm, Roscoe commented, warming hands by my fire. 3 hikers missing north of here. Search operation beginning tomorrow. Missing, the word hung ominously. Failed to return from summit attempt on McPherson Peak. Last radio contact reported unusual wildlife activity. Imala noticed my reaction. You've seen something too. It wasn't a question. I hesitated before retrieving my camera, showing them selected images of footprints and the broken tree. Not everything, not the cave encounter or the offerings. Roscoe whistled low. That's big, whatever it is. Bear walking peculiarly? Not a bear, I replied firmly. Imala, whose Yupik ancestry stretched back generations in these lands, studied the images carefully. My grandmother spoke of them, the hairy men, watchers in the forest. Bigfoot, Roscoe supplied the common term, voice skeptical but not dismissive. Whatever terminology you prefer, Imala continued, stories persist across every native culture in these territories. Not malevolent creatures necessarily, but dangerous when threatened. Territorial, intelligent. You believe they exist? Roscoe asked her. I believe these forests hold secrets modern science hasn't cataloged, she replied carefully. And I believe Denali's photos show something unusual. The conversation shifted to search plans for the missing hikers. I volunteered immediately, knowing what they potentially faced. If the creature had helped me, perhaps it had similarly assisted the lost hikers, or perhaps there were multiple creatures with different intentions. We departed at first light, heading northwest toward McPherson Peak. Fresh snow made tracking difficult, but not impossible. 6 miles in, we found the first anomaly, a shelter constructed from branches and pine boughs, clearly fashioned by human hands, but reinforced with techniques no basic wilderness training would include. Inside, remnants of food, a shredded backpack, and boot tracks matching 3 individuals. They survived the storm here, Roscoe concluded, examining the shelter's construction. But where did they go after? The answer came in tracks, leading northwest, not just the hiker's boots but accompanied by those now familiar massive footprints, sometimes paralleling, sometimes intersecting. They're being followed, I said, stomach tightening. Or led, Imala countered, studying the pattern. These prints sometimes come before the boot tracks, not after. We followed the trail through increasingly rugged terrain, areas no casual hiker would typically navigate. The pattern became clear. When the hiker's path would have led toward danger, unstable ice, hidden crevasses, avalanche zones, the larger tracks intervened, diverting their course toward safer passage. 5 miles further, we heard voices, human voices, calling for help. We rushed forward to find the 3 hikers alive but stranded on a rock outcropping above a newly formed ice chasm. The storm had collapsed their planned return route. During rescue and medical assessment, the hikers' story emerged in fragments. Something followed us for days, the group leader explained while Imala treated his frostbitten fingers. Massive. We only saw it clearly once, in the storm. It brought us firewood, the second hiker added, left a dead fox near our shelter. The third remained silent, traumatized by the experience, until I gently asked, "Did it whistle? A sound like wind through teeth?" His head snapped up, eyes wide. "You've heard it too." The return journey to Ranger headquarters allowed full debriefing. Official reports documented unusual wildlife activity and survival assistance from unidentified source. My photographic evidence was logged but classified, standard procedure for potentially sensitive ecological discoveries. Supervisor Morrison called me to her office after debriefing concluded. "You're not the first," she said without preamble, retrieving a file from her locked cabinet. "Every few years we get reports, footprints, sightings, inexplicable assistance rendered to lost hikers." The file contained dozens of photographs spanning decades, footprints identical to those I'd documented. Broken trees, shelters of suspicious construction. "Why isn't this public knowledge?" I asked. "What would you have us say? That folklore creatures patrol our forests, occasionally rescuing lost humans? The scientific community would crucify us. The public would either panic or flood the parks seeking encounters." She closed the file deliberately. "We document, we observe, we protect, both the public and whatever shares these forests with us." "What are they?" I finally asked the question directly. Morrison shrugged. "A species undocumented by science, remnant population of some prehistoric hominid, or exactly what native traditions have always claimed. Beings sharing our world but existing just beyond our understanding. I don't know." She fixed me with a serious gaze. "But I do know they were here long before us, and they'll remain long after. Their territory, their rules. We're just visitors." I returned to Black Pine Lake Station 2 weeks later. The cabin seemed different somehow. Not threatening, but not entirely mine either. Shared space. That first night back, I left a small offering on my porch. Smoked salmon, a regional delicacy. By morning, it was gone. In its place lay a perfectly formed arrowhead chipped from obsidian with expert precision. Some nights I still hear whistling from the forest edge. I don't fear it anymore. Out here in the vastness, boundaries between legends and reality blur. Ancient knowledge and modern understanding collide. The wilderness teaches humility to those willing to learn. I came to Alaska seeking escape, but found perspective instead. In these remote forests exist things science cannot yet explain and may never fully understand. And perhaps that's exactly as it should be.